My name is Isaiah Thomas, and I'm 75 years old. The day I buried my only son, Andre, his wife, Chloe, was nowhere to be seen. Hours later, my niece showed me a picture she'd just posted Chloe in Cancun, laughing with our gardener, a margarita in her hand. The caption read, "Enjoy life while you can." As my world crumbled for a second time that day, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my dead son's number. It said, "Dad, come to my house now. Before I tell you the impossible story that followed, a story of betrayal so deep it almost broke me, let me know in the comments below where you're listening from. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to face a truth that defied all logic. My son Andre was my world. After his mother Sarah passed away 5 years ago from cancer, he was all I had left. He was a good boy, a bright boy, always full of big ideas and even bigger dreams. He started his own small tech company in Houston, and while he always seemed to be chasing that one big breakthrough, his passion was infectious. He was a spark of light. To see that light extinguished at 45 years old in a sudden, senseless car accident, it's a pain that has no name. A father is not supposed to bury his son. It is an inversion of the natural order of things, a wound that you know with absolute certainty will never, ever heal. The funeral was a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. I stood by the graveside, the polished mahogany of his casket gleaming under the weak Texas sun. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's tragedy. Friends and family members, people I had known my whole life, came up to me one by one, their faces a mask of practiced sorrow. They'd wrap their arms around my shoulders, their hugs feeling brittle and hollow. They'd whisper the same empty words, the same useless platitudes that people say when they are confronted with a grief too large to comprehend. He's in a better place now, Isaiah. A better place than where I wanted to ask. A better place than sitting on the porch with his old man watching the Texans game. At least he didn't suffer. How do you know I wanted to scream? Were you there? But I said nothing. I just nodded my face. A stony mask accepting their clumsy attempts at comfort. My mind was a whirlwind of memories. Andre's first steps on the living room rug, the gap-toothed grin when he lost his first tooth, the pride in his eyes when he graduated from college. These memories were all I had left, and they were a torment. Through my own fog of pain, a second more unsettling fog began to roll in. The question was a low, persistent hum that soon became a roar in the quiet spaces between condolences. Where was Chloe? I kept scanning the crowd, looking for her blonde hair, for the familiar face of my son's wife, the woman who was supposed to be the chief mourner here today. She wasn't there. Not by the grave, not under the shade of the old oak tree, not anywhere. My sister Martha came and stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm. "Isaiah," she whispered, her voice tight with an anger I was too tired to feel. "Where is that girl? It's a disgrace. Her husband is being laid to rest and she's nowhere to be found. What kind of wife is that? She's too devastated, Martha." I heard myself say the lie, tasting like ash in my mouth. She couldn't bring herself to come. She's at home, prostrate with grief. Martha gave a disbelieving sniff. Prostrate with something, I'm sure. The whispers followed me as I moved through the crowd. I heard my cousin mutter to his wife, I never trusted her. Always seemed to be looking at what Andre had, not at Andre himself. Another voice drifted over. I heard they were having money problems. Maybe she just couldn't face everyone. Each whisper was another small crack in the dam of my composure. I was grieving the loss of my son, and now I was being forced to manage the scandal of his wife's absence. It was too much. I felt a wave of dizziness and had to brace myself against a headstone. All I wanted was to mourn my boy in peace, but even that was being stolen from me. The final prayer was said. The first handful of dirt was thrown. I watched as the groundskeepers began their final grim task, the sound of the shovels a rhythm of finality. People began to drift away, heading to their cars, leaving me alone with my sister and a few close relatives. But the question remained hanging in the humid air over my son's grave, a question more unsettling than death itself. Where, in God's name, was Chloe? My sister Martha came and stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm. Her knuckles were white. "Isaiah," she whispered, her voice tight with an anger I was too tired to feel. "Where is that girl? It's a disgrace. Her husband is being laid to rest and she's nowhere to be found. What kind of wife is that?" I could feel the eyes of our relatives on us, their ears straining to hear my answer. The whispers had been circulating for the past hour, a low, venomous tide of speculation and judgment. I had to stop it. For Andre, my son deserved more than to have his funeral become a stage for family gossip. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and put on the mask of the patriarch, the man holding his family together in a storm. She's broken, Martha," I said, my voice low and firm, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I was lying, of course. I had called the house that morning and gotten no answer, but I had to create a story, a shield to protect the memory of my son. She couldn't even get out of bed this morning. The doctor had to come over and give her a sedative. She's completely prostrate with grief. I looked my sister in the eye, willing her to believe me, to let it go. The last thing Andre would want is for us to judge her right now. Our job is to support her, not to condemn her. She's his wife. She's our family. The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. A part of me was just as confused and hurt by Chloe's absence as everyone else. Was I lying to them, or was I lying to myself? I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that somewhere across town my daughter-in-law was weeping for my son, not just absent. Martha looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face. I think she knew I was lying, but she also saw the deep, desperate pain in my eyes. Out of love for me, she let it go. "All right, Isaiah," she said softly, squeezing my arm. "If you say so." She moved away to speak with a cousin, repeating my story. My lie and the tide of whispers began to recede. I had done it. I had preserved the dignity of the moment. I had protected my son's name. But as I stood there, a lonely pillar of false strength, I felt a new kind of chill settle over me. I had managed the family, but the question remained now, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I had told them where Chloe was, but the truth was, I had no idea, and that scared me more than any of the whispers. The ride home from the cemetery was a blur. My sister Martha drove my car, her hands gripping the wheel, her face set in a grim line. I just stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of Houston pass by like scenes from a movie I was no longer a part of. When we pulled into my driveway, I saw that the street was lined with cars. The wake, another ritual of grief I had to endure. My house was full of people, full of the scent of baked ham and lilies, full of a low, murmuring sound that was supposed to be comforting but felt suffocating. Friends, neighbors, and family members I hadn't seen in years milled around my living room, balancing paper plates of food they weren't really eating. It was a strange, surreal performance. Everyone was playing a part. The concerned relatives, the supportive friends, and me, the grieving father, the star of this terrible, unwanted show. I moved through the rooms, a ghost in my own home. People would stop me, their faces etched with practiced sympathy. They'd wrap me in their arms, their hugs feeling distant and strange. They'd tell me what a good man Andre was, what a fine son I had raised. Each compliment was like a fresh stab to the heart, a reminder of what I had lost. I'd nod, murmur my thanks, and move on, an automaton going through the motions. But beneath the surface of the grief, another current was running through the house, the scandal of Chloe's absence. I could feel it in the way people looked at me. I could see it in the way they'd stop talking when I entered a room. The whispers from the cemetery had followed us home, and they were breeding in the corners of my house. My cousin squeezed my arm. "Any word from Chloe?" he asked, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "She's at home." I repeated the lie, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "She's inconsolable." He gave me a look of deep, pitying skepticism and moved away. I saw him join another group, and though I couldn't hear his words, I saw them all glance over at me. I was the subject of a story, a tragedy, with a juicy, mysterious subplot. The grieving father abandoned by his beautiful young and now very wealthy widow. I felt a desperate need to escape. I made my way through the crowd, nodding and murmuring until I found a moment of refuge in the small study where I used to help Andre with his homework. I sank into the old leather chair behind my desk, the room mercifully empty, and closed my eyes, the low hum of the crowd in the next room, a distant, unreal sound. For a moment, there was just the quiet and the profound, crushing weight of my loss. For a moment, there was just the quiet and the profound, crushing weight of my loss. I leaned my head back against the cool leather of the chair and tried to breathe. Just breathe. In and out. But even the air felt heavy, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and a future that had been stolen. The peace, fragile as it was shattered by a soft knock on the study door. My grandniece Angela, a sweet girl of about 19, peeked her head in. Her eyes were red from crying. "Grandpa Isaiah," she whispered, her voice hesitant. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you want to be alone, but there's something. I don't know if I should show you, but I think you need to see it." She was holding her phone in her hand like it was a live grenade. The worried, almost frightened look on her face sent a jolt of alarm through the fog of my grief. "What is it, dear?" I asked, my voice tired. It's from Instagram," she said, stepping into the room and holding out the phone. "My friend just sent it to me. It's Chloe." I took the phone from her. Her hands were trembling. In the dim light of the study, the small screen glowed with an almost unholy brightness. And on it was an image so jarring, so completely disconnected from the reality of my day that for a moment my brain simply refused to process it. It was a picture of paradise. The water in the background was a shade of turquoise, so vivid it looked like a postcard. The sand was impossibly white. A thatched roof bar adorned with festive lights was just visible in the corner. And in the center of it all was my daughter-in-law, Chloe, my son's grieving widow. She was not dressed in black. She was wearing a bright canary yellow bikini. She was not weeping. Her head was thrown back in a full-throated, joyous laugh, her teeth a perfect dazzling white against her sun-kissed skin. In her hand she held a large margarita, the glass rimmed with salt, a slice of lime perched on the edge. This was not the picture of a woman prostrate with grief. This was the picture of a woman without a care in the world, and she was not alone. Standing beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, his hand resting on her hip, was a young, handsome man. He was tan and muscular with a cheap-looking tattoo on his bicep. I recognized him instantly. It was the gardener, the young man Andre had hired a few months ago to take care of the lawn. He was smiling down at Chloe with an unmistakable look of intimate adoration. My mind reeled, grasping for a rational explanation. This must be an old photo, I thought, a wave of desperate denial washing over me. From a vacation they took last year. Angela's friend is mistaken. It's a terrible, cruel mistake. My eyes frantically scanned the screen, searching for proof, for anything to make this nightmare make sense. And then I saw it. Below the picture, the caption. 5 simple, brutal words glowing in crisp black font. "Enjoy life while you can." And below that, the location tag, Cancun, Mexico. And below that, the final damning piece of evidence. The timestamp, posted 1 hour ago. An hour ago, while I was standing by my son's grave, listening to the hollow sound of dirt hitting his casket. His wife was in Cancun, posting pictures of herself drinking with the gardener. The denial shattered. The shock hit me first, a wave of pure cold disbelief that seemed to stop my heart. It was a physical sensation, a hollowing out of my entire being. It was as if the universe had suddenly tilted on its axis, and everything I thought was real had been a lie. The grief for my son, the raw, all-consuming pain, was momentarily erased by this new, impossible reality. And then the shock curdled into something else. Something I had not felt with such intensity in a very, very long time. It was rage, a white-hot, silent rage that burned away the tears in my eyes and the sorrow in my heart. It wasn't a loud, explosive anger. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply terrifying fury. It was the anger of a man who has just realized the deepest betrayal imaginable. She wasn't just absent, she was celebrating. She was celebrating my son's death. My heavy, sorrowful grief for Andre was still there, but it now had a target. It was no longer a formless existential pain. It now had a face, the smiling, laughing, carefree face of my daughter-in-law on that glowing screen. The blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. The blurry, grief-stricken world I had been living in for the past few days suddenly snapped into sharp, terrible focus. I handed the phone back to Angela, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at her and she flinched, taking a small step back. She must have seen the change in my eyes. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice quiet, but with a new hard edge to it. "I've seen enough. I was no longer just a grieving father. I was something else now. Something far more dangerous." I handed the phone back to Angela, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at her and she flinched, taking a small step back. She must have seen the change in my eyes the moment the deep, sorrowful wells of a grandfather's grief froze over, becoming hard, cold, impenetrable ice. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice quiet, but with a new, sharp edge to it. "I've seen enough." She nodded, her young face filled with a fear and confusion she didn't understand, and she scurried away, melting back into the crowd of mourners. I stood there for a long moment in the relative quiet of the study. The image from the phone burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Chloe laughing in the sun, the gardener's hand on her hip, the caption, "Enjoy life while you can." I had to move. If I stayed in that room alone for another second, I felt like the rage coiling in my gut would make me punch a hole through a wall. I needed to be around people. I needed to hide in plain sight. I took a deep, steadying breath, straightened my suit jacket, and walked back out into the living room, back into the performance. The room was a blur of sympathetic faces and outstretched hands. The low murmur of conversation, which had been a comforting hum just minutes before, now felt like the buzzing of insects, meaningless and irritating. My cousin's wife, Sarah, approached me, her face a mask of pity. She pressed a paper plate into my hand. It was piled with food I couldn't name and would never eat. "You have to eat something, Isaiah," she said, her voice soft. "You have to keep your strength up." I looked down at the food, at the slice of glistening ham and the pale, lumpy potato salad. The sight of it, the very idea of nourishment, felt like a profound insult. My son was in the ground, his wife was dancing on his grave, and I was supposed to eat potato salad. The absurdity of it all was so overwhelming I almost laughed, a hysterical broken sound. I managed to stifle it, turning it into a cough. "Thank you, Sarah," I mumbled, taking the plate. "That's very kind." I moved through the room, an actor hitting his marks. I nodded. I accepted condolences. I listened to another story about what a fine young man Andre was, and all the while the picture was playing on a loop in my mind. The turquoise water, the white sand, the triumphant, joyous laugh. It was a desecration. Every memory of my son was now tainted by this single brutal image. The lie I had told at the cemetery about her being prostrate with grief now felt like a bitter joke, a self-inflicted wound. She wasn't just absent, she was celebrating. The storm inside me was building. It was a hurricane of questions, each one more painful than the last. How could she? How could she do this to him? To his memory? To me? The callousness was one thing, the cruelty was another. But the sheer public audacity of it, that's what I couldn't comprehend. To post it on social media for the entire world to see on the very day of his funeral. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration. A statement of utter contemptuous freedom. She wasn't mourning a loss. She was celebrating a victory. My mind started connecting the dots, the whispers at the funeral taking on a new sinister meaning. I heard they were having money problems. Had Andre's death solved those problems for her? The life insurance. My God, the life insurance. Andre had taken out a large policy a few years ago when he started his company. I was the secondary beneficiary, but Chloe, as his wife, was the primary. She was a wealthy woman now, a very wealthy widow, a widow who was currently drinking margaritas in Cancun. The rage was so intense it made my vision swim. It was a cold, clean fury that burned away the fog of grief. The world, which had been a blurry, muted landscape of pain for the past week, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrible focus. The vague, formless sorrow now had a target. It had a name and a smiling, sun-drenched face. I had to get away. I saw my sister Martha watching me from across the room, her expression worried. She could see something was wrong. I gave her a weak, reassuring nod that I did not feel, and made my way to the back of the house, to the screened-in porch that overlooked the garden. I needed air. I needed a moment to contain the storm before it broke and swept away everything in its path. I stood there gripping the railing, my knuckles white, breathing in the thick, humid air, trying to force the cold fury back down into the pit of my stomach. The passive, heartbreaking grief of a father who had lost his son was gone. In its place was something new, something active, something dangerous. A cold, hard resolve was forming in my soul like a diamond being compressed from the carbon of my rage and my pain. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to do something. I would not let this stand. I would not let her desecrate my son's memory this way. For Andre, I would find the truth. I stood there on the porch, gripping the wrought iron railing, my knuckles white. The sounds of the wake inside the house, the low murmur of voices and the clinking of plates seemed to be coming from a million miles away. My world had shrunk to the size of a single searing image burned into my mind, Chloe laughing in the sun. The storm of rage inside me had settled into a cold, hard resolve. I didn't know how, but I knew I was going to do something. I would not let this stand. I would not let her desecrate my son's memory this way. For Andre, I would find the truth. As that cold certainty settled in my bones, a low buzz vibrated in my pocket. My phone. My first instinct was irritation. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear another voice dripping with pity, another well-meaning but useless offer to be there for me. I pulled the phone out of my pocket, my thumb hovering over the button to silence it, to reject the intrusion. But then I saw the name on the screen, and the world stopped. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The sounds of the wake, the chirping of crickets in the evening garden, the distant hum of Houston traffic, it all vanished. My entire universe contracted to the small glowing rectangle in my hand. The name on the screen was Andre. My son. My dead son. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was impossible. A glitch. A cruel, sick prank. My thumb trembled over the screen. Was this Chloe? Was she using his phone to torment me further? The thought sent a fresh jolt of white-hot rage through me. I jabbed at the notification, my finger clumsy, ready to read some new, vile message from her. But it wasn't a call. It was a text message. And the words on the screen were not what I expected. They were simple. They were direct. They were impossible. Dad, come to my house now. Go alone. I read the words once, twice, a third time. My brain could not form a coherent thought. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces from a dozen different boxes. Andre was gone. I had just come from his funeral. I had watched his casket being lowered into the ground. And yet here were his words. Here was his name. Was I losing my mind? Was this what grief did? Did it make you see ghosts in your phone? Was I hallucinating? The rage I had felt just moments before was gone, vaporized by a tidal wave of pure, disbelieving shock that was so immense it felt like a physical blow, knocking the very breath from my lungs. I stood there frozen on my back porch, the sounds of my own son's wake filtering through the screen door. My reality had been shattered not once but twice in the space of 10 minutes. First by an act of unimaginable betrayal from my daughter-in-law, and now by an impossible message from my son. I stared at the glowing screen, at the words that should not exist, and a terrifying, unbidden question began to form in the ruins of my shattered heart. What on God's earth was happening? I don't know how long I stood there on the porch, frozen, staring at the glowing screen. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. The world had dissolved into a meaningless hum, my entire consciousness focused on the two impossible sentences sent from my dead son's phone. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the railing to steady myself. I had to move. I had to think. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the feel of it a hard rectangular knot of impossibility against my leg. I turned and walked back into the house, my face, I'm sure, as pale as a ghost. My sister Martha saw me immediately, her eyes wide with concern. "Isaiah, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost let out a hysterical laugh. I need some air." I lied the words, feeling clumsy in my mouth. "No, I need to lie down. The day has been too much. I need to go upstairs for a while." Of course," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "You go rest. I'll handle things here. I'll tell people you're exhausted." I gave her a grateful nod, not meeting her eyes. I didn't go upstairs. I walked through the crowded dining room, through the kitchen, and slipped out the back door into the darkness of the yard. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the key already in the ignition. My hands were trembling so badly it took me 2 tries to start the engine. The drive to Andre's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I drove on autopilot, my mind a chaotic storm of fear, doubt, and a tiny, terrifying spark of hope that felt like madness. The streetlights of Houston blurred past my window, streaks of orange and white in the deepening twilight. With every mile, I wrestled with the impossibility of it all. It's a prank, my logical mind screamed. A cruel, sick, twisted prank. It has to be Chloe. She has his phone, and she's doing this to torment me, to push me over the edge. The thought filled me with a fresh wave of cold, clean rage. But then another thought would surface, a more insidious one. What if it isn't? My mind replayed the funeral, the closed casket, the weight of it as the pallbearers carried it, the final hollow sound of the dirt hitting the lid. It was real. I was there. My son was gone. He had to be. To believe anything else was to step into the abyss of insanity. And yet the message. Dad, come to my house now. Go alone. It was his voice, his words. The simple, direct way he always texted me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Hope is a beautiful thing, but the hope of a dead man's return is a terrifying, poisonous thing. It felt more painful than the grief itself. The grief was a certainty, a solid ground of sorrow to stand on. This was a nightmare, a phantom limb that was suddenly impossibly tingling with life. I pulled onto Andre's street. It was dark, quiet. His house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, every window dark, just as you would expect the home of a dead man to be. There were no cars in the driveway. I pulled up to the curb, cut the engine, and sat there, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath. I got out of the car, the silence of the suburban street deafening. I walked up the stone path to the front door, each step feeling heavy, unreal. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling, half expecting to find it locked. Half hoping to find it locked, because if it was locked, it meant this was all a dream, a nightmare. But if it opened, I had no idea what I was about to find on the other side. I stood on the porch, my hand on the cold brass of the doorknob. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs. I took a deep, shaky breath and turned. The knob moved. The latch clicked back. It was unlocked. A new wave of dread washed over me. An unlocked door was wrong. It felt like a trap, an invitation into a nightmare I wasn't prepared for. But I had to know. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dark. Not just dark from the night, but a deep, still, lifeless dark. The air was stale and cold, the way air gets in a place that has been abandoned. All the curtains were drawn. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a tomb. Andre, I whispered, my voice, a dry, cracking sound that was swallowed by the oppressive silence. There was no answer. I took a few steps into the entryway, my hand fumbling along the wall for a light switch. My fingers found the familiar plastic plate and I flicked it up. Nothing happened. The power was off. A cold fear, sharp and primal, pierced through my confusion. What was happening here? Was this a trap? Was Chloe here? Was someone else here? Andre. I called out again, my voice a little louder, a little more desperate. A floorboard creaked in the darkness of the living room to my left. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Someone was in the house. I could hear a faint, ragged breathing sound. I stood perfectly still, my own breathing catching in my chest. My mind, which had been a storm of impossible hope just moments before, was now a blank slate of pure terror. A shape detached itself from the deeper shadows near the fireplace. A man. He was just a silhouette against the faint moonlight filtering through the closed blinds. He took a hesitant step toward me. Dad. The voice was a hoarse, broken whisper. But I knew it. I would know that voice anywhere. It was the first voice that had ever called me Dad. It was the voice of my son. My legs felt weak and I had to brace myself against the wall. I couldn't process it. My mind was breaking. This was a ghost. This was my grief finally tearing my sanity apart. The figure took another step and then another until he was standing just a few feet away from me. Even in the gloom, I could see him more clearly now. It was Andre, but it was a version of him I had never seen before. His face was covered in a rough, patchy beard. His hair was greasy and unkempt. His clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, were rumpled and smelled sour. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They were wide, darting, and filled with a raw, animal panic. This was not my confident, ambitious son. This was a man who had been to hell and back. Andre, I whispered the name, an incredulous question. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, almost violent. Dad, you have to listen to me, he hissed, his eyes darting towards the windows. Did anyone follow you? Are you sure you came alone? My mind couldn't keep up. The funeral, the casket, the picture of Chloe, the text message. And now my son, alive and terrified, standing in front of me. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was impossible, a dream, a hallucination. But the feel of his hand on my arm, the familiar scent of him, the desperate fear in his eyes, it was real. I reached out my own trembling hand and touched his face, my fingers brushing against the rough stubble of his beard. He was solid. He was warm. He was alive. How? The word came out as a choked sob. How is this possible, Andre? We We just buried you. I was at your funeral." A look of pain and shame flashed across his face. He let go of my arm and ran a hand through his messy hair. "It's not what you think, Dad. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I said, my voice rising, a wave of anger finally cutting through the shock. "Complicated. My son is dead." I just spent the entire day accepting condolences, watching my family weep while his wife. I couldn't even finish the sentence. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know about Chloe. I saw the picture. That's why I had to message you. Dad, you don't understand. I'm in trouble. Real trouble." He rushed to the window, peeking through a small crack in the blinds, his body tense with paranoia. "Stop looking out the window and talk to me," I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. "Tell me what is happening." He spun around, his finger to his lips, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad, please lower your voice. They could be listening. You have to believe me. This was all a plan. It was all a stupid, stupid plan. And it has all gone wrong." He stood there in the oppressive darkness of his own home, a ghost haunted by his own terrible decisions. My mind, still reeling, tried to anchor itself to his words. A plan. A stupid, stupid plan. The shock of seeing him alive was slowly, horrifyingly being replaced by the dawning dread of what he was about to say. The impossible joy of a resurrection was curdling into the sickening realization of a profound betrayal. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice a low, hard command that surprised even me. The grief and confusion had momentarily given way to a father's desperate need to take control of an uncontrollable situation. "Turn on a light, sit down, and you will tell me everything. Now." He fumbled for a moment, then found a small table lamp, clicking it on. The sudden pool of weak yellow light threw his face into sharp relief. He looked terrible. There were dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes. His skin was pale and clammy. This was not just a man in hiding. This was a man in terror. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't know what else to do, Dad," he began, his voice muffled by his palms. I was drowning. I sat down in the armchair opposite him, the same chair I had sat in for hours during his mother's illness, and I waited. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer a kind word. I just waited for the truth, no matter how ugly. He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic shame. "My company, the tech business, it was a failure, Dad. A complete failure." The words hit me another small, painful blow. For the past year, he had been telling me how well things were going, how he was on the verge of a major breakthrough, a big contract that would set him up for life. It was all a lie. "I've been lying to you for months," he confessed, as if reading my mind. "I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want to be a disappointment." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Look at me now." He went on to paint a grim picture of his financial ruin. He had poured all his savings and all of ours that he could get his hands on into the failing business. When that wasn't enough, he had taken out loans not from banks but from private lenders, the kind of men who don't care about credit scores and charge an interest rate that is impossible to escape. He was in debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The pressure was immense. "And Chloe," he said, his voice dropping, "she couldn't handle it. The stress, the calls from creditors, the fear of losing the house, the cars, our lifestyle. She said we were going to lose everything. She said I had failed her. She was the one who came up with the idea. The idea," I asked, my voice cold as ice. "The insurance policy," he whispered. "The $2 million life insurance policy I took out when I started the company. It was supposed to be a safety net for her if something happened to me. But it became a lottery ticket, a way out. Chloe said it was the only way, a clean slate." I stared at him, my heart turning to a block of stone in my chest. I was beginning to understand, and the truth was 100 times more monstrous than anything I could have imagined. "Tell me how, Andre," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me how you did it." He took a deep, shuddering breath. It was all planned. The car accident. It wasn't an accident. We bought an old salvaged car for cash. The location was a quiet stretch of highway out past Conroe, a place with no cameras. He was speaking in a flat monotone now, like a man reciting a list of ingredients. The hard part, he said, his eyes not meeting mine, was the passenger. We needed a body. A wave of nausea washed over me. I gripped the arms of the chair. A body Chloe knew, someone, he said, his voice barely audible. Someone who knew someone who worked at the county morgue. An unclaimed body, a John Doe, a man with no family, no one to miss him. It cost us almost everything we had left. To get the body, to get the dental records falsified to match mine. I felt sick. My son, my child, was describing a ghoulish criminal conspiracy that sounded like something out of a cheap gangster movie. The plan was simple. He continued, his voice now a hollow robotic whisper. I would drive the car with the body in the passenger seat. At the designated spot, I would get out, push the car down the embankment, and set it on fire. The fire had to be intense to make identification difficult except for the teeth. I had a go bag hidden in the woods. I would walk away, disappear. Chloe would play the part of the grieving widow. The police would find the wreck, the burned car, the body inside. They would identify it as me from the dental records. A tragic single-car accident. Case closed. He looked up at me, a desperate need for understanding in his eyes. It was supposed to be a clean slate dad. Chloe would collect the $2 million. I would be hiding out waiting. After a few months, when everything had cooled down, she would wire me the money, and I would start a new life somewhere else, maybe South America. And eventually she would follow. We would be free. Free from the debt, free from the pressure. Free. He finished his confession, the whole ugly, monstrous story laid bare between us. I looked at the man sitting on the sofa, this stranger who wore my son's face. The grief I had felt at his funeral was a clean, simple pain compared to this. This was a nauseating, soul-crushing agony. The son I had mourned, the tragic victim, had never existed. In his place was a man who was weak, a liar, a criminal. A man who had conspired with his wife to commit a crime so ghoulish it made my blood run cold. My son hadn't just died. He had erased himself, replacing his memory with this ugly, unforgivable truth. The man I had buried that morning was a stranger, but the man sitting in front of me now, he was a stranger too. He finished his confession, the whole ugly, monstrous story laid bare between us in the dim yellow light of the table lamp. I looked at the man sitting on the sofa, this stranger who wore my son's face. The grief I had felt at his funeral was a clean, simple pain compared to this. This was a nauseating, soul-crushing agony. The son I had mourned, the tragic victim, had never existed. In his place was a man who was weak, a liar, a criminal. A man who had conspired with his wife to commit a crime so ghoulish it made my blood run cold. My son hadn't just died. He had erased himself, replacing his memory with this ugly, unforgivable truth. The man I had buried that morning was a stranger, but the man sitting in front of me now, he was a stranger too. A cold, hard anger. The same fury I had felt when I saw Chloe's picture began to rise in my chest again, but this time it was directed at my own flesh and blood. I stood up, unable to sit still, and began to pace the small, dark living room. So that was it, I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I was barely able to contain. That was your grand plan, to fake your own death, to let me and your entire family mourn you, to let your mother's friends weep at an empty casket, all for money. He flinched at the anger in my voice. We were desperate, Dad. Don't you use that word with me, I snapped. Desperate is not knowing how you're going to pay the rent. Desperate is your mother working 2 jobs to put you through college. What you were is greedy, weak, and pathetic. He didn't argue. He just sat there and took at his face a mask of shame. I stopped pacing and faced him, my mind trying to reconcile the elaborate plan with the terrified man in front of me. Something didn't add up. If that was the plan, I asked, my voice cold and logical, then why are you here? Why aren't you in South America living a new life? Why did you call me? He looked up at me, and the expression in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated despair. Because she played me, Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. She played me from the very beginning. And then he told me the rest of the story. The double cross. After the faked accident, he had driven to a cheap no-name motel off the highway, a place where no one asked for ID and everyone paid in cash. He had stayed there for a week, a prisoner in a small, stale room, watching the news on a flickering television, waiting for the story of his own death to break. He described the surreal, sickening feeling of seeing his own high school yearbook photo flash on the screen, of reading his own obituary online. He and Chloe had a communication plan, a secret encrypted email address. He showed me the messages on his phone. The first few emails from her were perfect. She was playing the part of the grieving widow flawlessly. She wrote about the funeral arrangements, about how devastated everyone was, about how supportive my sister Martha was being. She told him the insurance company had been notified and were processing the claim with surprising speed out of compassion for the grieving family. Everything she said was going according to plan. I believed her. Andre said, his voice a hollow echo of his own foolishness. Every word. I thought we were a team. I thought we were in this together. The first red flag he told me was a small detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. In one of her emails, Chloe had mentioned the gardener Carlos. Carlos has been such a help, she had written. He's been coming by every day, checking on me, bringing me groceries. It's so sweet. I felt a flicker of something Andre said, looking at me. A little bit of jealousy, maybe paranoia. I was cooped up in that room going crazy, and she was getting grocery deliveries from the damn gardener. I told her I didn't like him being there. She just told me not to be silly, that she was a grieving widow and he was just a kind neighbor. He had let it go. He had trusted her. A few days later, the big email arrived. The subject line was a single word: success. The insurance money, the full $2 million, had been wired into the new account Chloe had set up. Andre described the overwhelming sense of relief, of victory that had washed over him. They had done it. They had pulled it off. He wrote back telling her to transfer his half to the offshore account they had arranged and that he would be on a flight to Brazil by the end of the week. That was the last email he ever received from her. He waited a day. Nothing. He sent another email. No reply. He sent a third, a fourth, his messages growing more frantic. Still nothing. When he tried to log into the secret email account the next morning, the password had been changed. A cold, sickening dread began to creep into his soul. He tried the burner phone she was supposed to be using. The number had been disconnected. I was panicking, Dad, he said, his voice trembling. I was trapped in that motel room with my cash running out. I was a dead man with no ID, no access to any money. I was a ghost, and she had just vanished. Desperate, he did the one thing he knew he shouldn't. He used the cheap laptop he had to log onto her public social media pages. And that's when he saw it. The same picture my niece had shown me. I saw her, he whispered, his voice breaking. I saw her in Cancun, laughing, holding a drink. And I saw him, Carlos, the gardener. His arm was around her waist. And I looked at his face and at her smile, and I knew in that instant. He wasn't just the gardener, and she wasn't just my partner. She had been playing a different game all along, a longer game, and I wasn't her partner. I was the mark. The full ugly truth of it hung in the air between us. My son, the schemer, had been out-schemed. The con man had been conned. He had faked his own death for $2 million, and his wife had taken the money and run off with another man, leaving him legally dead, broke, and hunted. He looked up at me, his face a wreck of shame, terror, and a pathetic, desperate plea for help. She played me, Dad. He repeated the words, a final, devastating admission of his own stupidity. She played me from the start. And now the people I borrowed money from for the body, they're looking for me. They know the insurance paid out and they want their cut. But the money's gone. It's all gone. I'm trapped. I can't go to the police. I can't access any of my old accounts. I'm a dead man walking. I had nowhere else to go. I had no one else to call. The whole ugly, monstrous story was laid bare between us in the dim yellow light of the table lamp. I looked at the man sitting on the sofa, this stranger who wore my son's face. The grief I had felt at his funeral was a clean, simple pain compared to this. This was a nauseating, soul-crushing agony. The son I had mourned, the tragic victim, had never existed. In his place was a man who was weak, a liar, a criminal. My son hadn't just died. He had erased himself. For a long moment, all I felt was a cold, hard rage, a rage so pure and so intense it felt like it could shatter my own bones. I thought of the funeral. I thought of my sister Martha, her face racked with real, honest grief. I thought of Andre's friends, his cousins, all the people who had loved him gathered at a graveside to mourn a man who was hiding in a cheap motel room. I thought of my own heart, which had been broken into a million pieces, all for a lie, all for money. My first instinct, my most primal urge was to stand up, walk out the door and call the police, to let the whole rotten structure of his lies come crashing down on his head. He had made his bed. He deserved to lie in it. He was not my son, not anymore. He was a criminal who had committed a monstrous act. Justice was simple. Let him face it. I actually started to stand up. The decision was made. I was going to turn him in. But then he looked at me, And in that moment, he wasn't a con man. He wasn't a criminal. He was just a terrified little boy. The same boy who had once fallen out of the big oak tree in our backyard and had looked up at me with the same wide, terrified eyes, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, and my gut reaction then as it was now was not to judge but to help. The father in me was at war with the man in me. The man demanded justice, but the father only saw his child broken and bleeding. "They're going to kill me, Dad," he whispered, his voice shaking, pulling me back from the edge of my rage. "Petrov, the man I borrowed from, he's not the kind of person you can ignore. If he finds me before I can pay him back, he will kill me." And Chloe, she knew that. She knew she wasn't just leaving me with no money, she was leaving me with a death sentence. And there it was, the final terrible piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an attempted murder by proxy. Chloe hadn't just run away, she had thrown my son to the wolves. That knowledge changed everything. My rage, which had been a chaotic burning fire, now cooled and hardened, sharpening into the point of a spear. The target was no longer just my son. The real target was her. But first I had to deal with the problem in front of me. I couldn't leave him here. He was a fool and a criminal, but he was my fool. He was my son. "Get your things," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Whatever you have left. We're leaving." "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice a mixture of hope and fear. "Don't ask questions," I said. "Just move." The drive was long and silent. We left the city behind, heading east into the dark, pine-covered backroads of East Texas. Andre sat in the passenger seat, a pathetic, huddled figure, his face illuminated every few seconds by the passing headlights of another car. I didn't look at him. I just drove my mind a battlefield. What was I doing? I was harboring a fugitive. I was becoming an accessory to his crime. The simple, clean line of justice I had wanted to draw just an hour ago was now a tangled, messy knot. If I helped him escape, I was as guilty as he was. If I turned him in, his blood might be on my hands. I thought of Lena. What would she have done? Lena was a woman of fierce morality. She would have been disgusted by Andre's actions. But she was also a mother, and her love for her son, however disappointed, was a powerful primal force. She would not have chosen the easy path. She would have chosen the right one, no matter how difficult. We finally arrived. It was an old hunting cabin my father had built decades ago deep in the woods, a place I hadn't been to in years. It was dusty, it smelled of mice and old memories, but it was safe. It was off the grid. No one knew it existed. I got him settled in with a can of soup from the old pantry and a bottle of water. I gave him the rules. You do not leave this cabin. You do not turn on any lights after dark. You do not try to contact anyone. You will sit here and you will think about what you have done. Is that clear? He nodded, his eyes wide like a child being scolded. I stood in the doorway, ready to leave, ready to begin the next phase of this nightmare. And in that moment, standing there looking at my broken son in the dim light of that dusty cabin, my final decision crystallized. I couldn't just save him. That would be a disservice to his mother's memory. That would teach him nothing. Forgiveness without consequences is not forgiveness. It is permission. And I couldn't just turn him in. That felt too simple, too clean. It would let Chloe, the true architect of this whole disaster, get away with $2 million laughing on a beach in Mexico. No. There had to be a third path, a path that Lena would have chosen. A path that was not about mercy and not about simple revenge. It was about justice. A real complex and painful justice. I would not do this for Andre. I would do this for my own sense of what was right, for the memory of my wife, and for the family my son had so thoroughly dishonored. I would not be his savior, but I would be his reckoning, and I would be Chloe's. I turned and walked out of the cabin, closing the door on my son and the past. My face was set, my purpose was clear. The grieving father was gone. The hunter had just been born, and the hunt had just begun. After leaving my son in the dusty silence of that old hunting cabin, I drove back to Houston. The war inside me was over. The father who wanted to protect his child and the man who demanded justice had reached a truce. I would not let my son be killed by loan sharks, but I would not let him escape the consequences of his actions either. And I would certainly not let his treacherous wife Chloe enjoy a life of luxury built on a foundation of our family's pain. Lena's plan for our family had been a fortress of defense. Now I had to build a plan of my own, a plan of attack, and I knew I couldn't do it alone. As a retired engineer, my first instinct when faced with a complex problem is to gather data and consult an expert. I spent the next 48 hours in my study not sleeping, just drinking black coffee and staring at my computer screen. I didn't search for private investigators in the yellow pages. I searched for the best. I looked for retired HPD homicide detectives, men who had spent their lives untangling webs of lies far more complex than this one. I cross-referenced names, read old news articles, and looked for specialists in financial fraud and international cases. After 2 days, I had a name: Marcus Thorne. 25 years with HPD, the last 10 as a lead detective on their most high-profile cases. Now he ran a small, discreet private firm in a glass tower downtown. His office was on the 30th floor, a corner suite with a commanding view of the city. The space was clean, modern, and impersonal. There were no dusty files or half-empty bottles of whiskey. There was just a large mahogany desk, 2 leather chairs, and the man sitting behind it. Marcus Thorne was about my age, a tall, impeccably dressed African-American man with a quiet, watchful intensity. He had the kind of eyes that didn't just look at you. They seemed to be taking a full inventory of your soul. He listened to my initial request for a meeting over the phone without a single question and simply gave me a time. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Mr. Thomas," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "You said on the phone you had an unusual situation. My time is expensive. Please tell me what that is." I had learned from Lena. I didn't begin with an emotional story. I began with facts. I opened the thin folder I had brought with me and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. It was a printout of Chloe's Instagram post. "This is my daughter-in-law, Chloe Thomas," I said, my voice steady. "This picture was taken in Cancun, Mexico, and posted online 3 days ago on the day of her husband's funeral." Thorne looked at the picture, his expression unreadable. He didn't say a word. I placed a second sheet of paper next to it. It was a copy of my son's death certificate. "This is my son, Andre Thomas. He was pronounced dead a week ago, the victim of a single car accident and subsequent fire." Thorne's eyes flickered from the death certificate to the picture, and for the first time I saw a flicker of interest. "And this," I said, placing my phone on his desk and playing a short, muffled audio recording, "is my son's voice, recorded in his own house less than 12 hours ago." Thorne leaned back in his chair, his eyes now locked on me. He steepled his fingers under his chin. He was no longer a retired cop listening to a potential client. He was a detective who had just been presented with the first 3 pieces of an impossible puzzle. "Why aren't you at HPD, Mr. Thomas?" he asked, his voice a quiet, professional probe. "Because," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "while my daughter-in-law may be a thief and a traitor, my son is a fool and a criminal. He conspired with her to fake his own death to defraud a life insurance company of $2 million. If I go to the police, my son goes to prison for a very long time, assuming the men he borrowed money from don't get to him first. I am not here to ask you to help my son escape the law. I am not here to ask for your pity." "Then what are you here for, Mr. Thomas?" he asked. This was the moment. This was where he would decide if I was just another grieving father or a serious client. "I am an engineer, Mr. Thorne," I said. "I solve problems. And right now I have a multifaceted problem. The first is my daughter-in-law, Chloe. She has successfully stolen $2 million and is currently living in a foreign country. The second is the man she is with, a gardener named Carlos, about whom I know nothing. The third is my son, who is a fugitive from the law and a target for the criminals he is indebted to. What I want from you is information. Information is leverage. I want you to find Chloe Thomas. I want you to find out exactly where that $2 million is. I want to know everything there is to know about this Carlos. I want to know who my son borrowed money from. I want you to give me all the pieces of this puzzle." "And what will you do with these pieces?" Mr. Thomas Thorne asked, his eyes studying me intently. "I will arrange them," I said. "I will arrange them in such a way that justice is served. Chloe will not get away with this. The insurance company will get its money back. And my son will face the consequences of his actions, but he will do so on my terms, not hers, and not at the bottom of a river." I leaned forward. "I am not hiring you to save my son, Mr. Thorne. I am hiring you to help me execute a strategy that will require discretion, intelligence, and a complete lack of sentimentality. Your reputation suggests you possess all 3. A slow reptilian smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile of professional appreciation, the smile of a master craftsman recognizing the work of another. "Mr. Thomas," he said, leaning forward and extending his hand across the desk. "I believe we can do business." I wrote him a check for a retainer that was more money than I had ever spent in one go in my life. It was a significant portion of my savings. But it was not an expense, it was an investment. An investment in the only kind of justice Lena would have approved of, a justice that was as intelligent, as methodical, and as unyielding as she was. As I left his office and looked out over the sprawling city, I did not feel like a grieving father anymore. I felt like a general who had just hired his chief of intelligence. The first piece of my own game was now in play. After the meeting with Marcus Thorne, I drove home feeling a strange sense of calm. The hunter had his scout. The general had his intelligence chief. The game was afoot. But I knew that Thorne could only find the pieces of the puzzle I sent him looking for. It was up to me to assemble the pieces I already had. Before I left Andre's house that first night, I had grabbed the one thing I knew would hold the most truth, the box of financial records from his home office. Andre in his panic had overlooked it. But I knew, and Lena had always known, that the real story of a person's life is written not in their words, but in their ledgers. That night I sat in my study, a single desk lamp cutting a sharp circle of light in the otherwise dark and silent house. In front of me were the contents of the box stacks of bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements, and tax returns. It was a mountain of paper that represented the last few years of my son's life. With a cup of black coffee at my side, I began my work. I was an engineer for 40 years. My job was to analyze complex systems, to find points of failure, to understand how a small weakness in one part could lead to a catastrophic collapse of the whole. Tonight, my son's life was the system, and I was going to deconstruct it piece by painful piece. I started with the business accounts. For years, Andre had painted a rosy picture of his tech company. He'd talk about promising leads, about being on the verge of a big contract. I had wanted to believe him, so I did. Now the stark, unforgiving numbers on the bank statements told the real story. The deposits, which had been steady for the first year, began to dwindle. The expenses, however, only grew. Software licenses, server costs, office rent. The outflow was a relentless, gushing wound. By the last 6 months, I could see a pattern of bounced checks and overdraft fees. The business wasn't just failing. It was a corpse, and Andre had been trying to make it dance for the better part of a year. The shame of his failure and the shame of my own willful blindness was a bitter taste in my mouth. Next, I moved to the personal credit card statements. This was where the story turned from a tragedy of failed ambition to a sickening tale of delusion. While the business was bleeding out, Andre and Chloe were living the high life. The statements were a roadmap of their denial. $500 dinners at fancy restaurants downtown, weekend trips to Napa. Tiffany's statements were the worst, a relentless series of purchases from designer boutique stores with names I didn't even recognize. Thousands of dollars for a single handbag, thousands more for a pair of shoes. It was a lifestyle completely disconnected from their reality, a fantasy financed by a mountain of high-interest debt. The total was staggering. They weren't just in debt, they were buried under it. And that's when I found the third layer, the darkest layer. Beneath the legitimate debts to banks and credit card companies, there was something else. I started noticing unusual large cash deposits into Andre's checking account. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. They were always followed a few weeks later by a series of frantic, smaller withdrawals, often from ATMs late at night. It was a pattern that made my stomach turn. This wasn't how a business operated. This was how a man in desperate trouble behaved. In a folder labeled Personal Loans, tucked away at the bottom of the box, I found the source. There were 2 promissory notes. They weren't from a bank. They were from a company called Petrov Capital Investments. The letterhead was simple. The interest rate was not. It was a predatory, astronomical number that was designed to be impossible to pay back. I did a quick search for the company online. There was no official website, just a few shadowy references on legal forums and a series of warnings to stay away. This was a loan shark, plain and simple. And on the second note, a handwritten one, there was just a name and a number. The name was the one my son had whispered in terror, Petrov. Next to the name was a terrifyingly large number with the letters VIG scrawled beside it. Vigorish, the juice, the interest on a loan that could only be paid back with cash or with blood. The full horrifying picture finally snapped into focus. My son's desperation was no longer an abstract concept. It was here in black and white. He hadn't just been failing, he had been sinking in quicksand. He had made a deal with the devil to keep his and Chloe's fantasy life afloat, and the devil had come to collect. The insurance fraud wasn't just a get-rich-quick scheme. In his mind, it had been a matter of life and death. He had faked his own death to escape a man who would have likely made it a reality. And Chloe, she had known. She had to have known. She had watched him make these deals, had enjoyed the fruits of the borrowed money, and then at the last possible moment she had cut the rope and left him to the sharks. Her betrayal was even deeper and more monstrous than I had imagined. I sat back in my chair, the papers spread out before me like the wreckage of a crash. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light into my study. I had been up all night, but I didn't feel tired. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. My mission, which had started as a quest for a vague, abstract notion of justice, was now brutally simple. It had become a race to find Chloe and the money before Petrov and his people found my son. The hunt had just become a rescue mission. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Marcus Thorne. 3 days later, I was sitting across from Marcus Thorne again, this time in a quiet, anonymous coffee shop halfway across town. The air smelled of roasted coffee and old books. It was the kind of place you could disappear into. Thorne slid a thin manila folder across the table toward me. There was no preamble, no small talk. He was all business. Initial report, Mr. Thomas, he said, his voice a low rumble. I opened the folder. Inside were several pages of typed text and a half-dozen photographs. The photos were grainy, clearly taken from a long distance, but they were unmistakable. There was Chloe lounging by a sparkling blue pool, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her eyes. There was the gardener Carlos laughing as he came out of a high-end jewelry store, a small, elegant bag in his hand. There was a picture of them at a fancy candlelit dinner, their heads close together. They looked like any other wealthy, carefree couple on a romantic getaway. But in one photo taken from a hotel balcony across the street, I saw something else. It was a picture of Carlos standing on their hotel balcony, alone, talking on his phone. His back was to their room. His expression wasn't relaxed or happy. It was tense, watchful, almost predatory. So, she's not exactly hiding, I said, looking up at Thorne. Far from it, he replied, taking a slow sip of his black coffee. She's at the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun, living like a queen. She booked the presidential suite for a month. She's been making daily cash withdrawals from a local account she set up, always just under the $10,000 reporting limit. But she's also been busy. We tracked a series of encrypted calls from her room to a small private financial institution in the Cayman Islands. She's trying to move the bulk of the insurance money, trying to make it disappear into the global financial plumbing for good. She's not stupid. She knows she can't sit on $2 million in a Mexican bank account forever. And him, I asked, tapping the picture of the gardener. Carlos Thorne allowed himself a small, dry smile. Her companion is far more interesting, he said. His name isn't Carlos. It's Ricardo Diaz. He's not a gardener from Houston. He's from Miami. He has a record. A few minor fraud charges in Florida a couple of years ago. But more interestingly, he has known connections to a small-time Cuban syndicate that operates out of Miami. He's not just a boy toy you picked up to mow the lawn, Mr. Thomas. He's a professional opportunist, a parasite who attaches himself to people with more money than sense. My mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle starting to click into place. Chloe hadn't just run off with a random young man. She had found a partner, a man with experience in the world of crime and deception. And here, Thorne said, his voice dropping slightly, is where it gets interesting. Here is her weakness. Here is her Achilles' heel. He leaned forward. People like Ricardo Diaz are not loyal, Mr. Thomas. They are loyal to money. Right now, Chloe is the money. She's his winning lottery ticket, but she's also the only link to it. He needs her to make the transfers to access the accounts, and from what my contacts in Mexico tell me, he's getting restless. He's spending her money faster than she can move it. He's the one who bought the watch at that jewelry store, a $20,000 Rolex. He's making his own calls back to his friends in Miami. He's getting nervous. A man with his background knows that a $2 million insurance fraud case is not a small thing. It brings a lot of unwanted attention. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me. He is her greatest liability. If he feels the pressure, if he starts to think the ship is sinking, or if he simply thinks there's a better deal to be made by selling her out, he will turn on her in a heartbeat. He will cut her loose and disappear with whatever he can carry. I looked down at the photograph of Ricardo Diaz on the phone, his face tense and watchful. The engineer in me began to see the system, the stress points, the levers. This wasn't a love affair. It was a business partnership between two untrustworthy criminals, and it was an unstable one. I now knew how to break them. I didn't need to attack Chloe directly. I just needed to apply pressure to her weakest point. I looked up at Thorne, a new cold strategy forming in my mind. The hunter now had his target, and he knew exactly where to aim. "So, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "you're telling me that a man with expensive tastes and criminal connections is on a high-stakes vacation with $2 million and a partner he can't possibly trust. I think it's time we made his vacation a little more stressful." The call from Marcus Thorne came a week later. It had been a long, quiet week, punctuated only by my tense, twice-weekly trips to the hunting cabin to bring Andre supplies. Those trips were the hardest part. My son had gone from a panicked, broken man to a caged animal. He paced the dusty floor of the small cabin, his eyes wild with paranoia and impotence. He would bombard me with questions. "Did you hear anything, Dad? Have you found her? What are you doing?" And I would give him the same curt answer every time. "I'm handling it. Be patient." I couldn't tell him what I was doing. I couldn't tell him that I had hired a private investigator, that I was spending my life savings to hunt down his wife. Because if I told him, he would want to be involved. And this was my game, not his. He had played his game and lost. Now he was a piece on my board, a piece I had to keep safe, but a piece that did not get to know the strategy. The drives back to Houston were always filled with a heavy silence, the weight of his pathetic desperation a stone in my gut. Thorne's call was brief and to the point. "I have something you need to see." My office. 1 hour. I was there in 45 minutes. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He gestured for me to sit and then slid a folder across his mahogany desk that was considerably thicker than the first one. "We've been busy, Mr. Thomas," he said, his voice a low, professional rumble. "Your daughter-in-law is a very interesting woman." I opened the folder. The first few pages were financial transaction reports, a dizzying web of numbers and acronyms. Thorne began to explain. "She's smarter than we initially thought. The money didn't just go to a single account in the Cayman Islands. That was just the first stop. From there, it was a shell game. 1.5 million was wired to a private bank in Zurich, Switzerland. From there, it was split again, with smaller portions being funneled to accounts in Cyprus and Singapore. She's layering it, making it incredibly difficult to trace. This is not the work of an amateur." My heart sank. "So, the money's gone." "Dispersed, not gone," Thorne corrected. "It's recoverable, but it would require a team of international forensic accountants and a mountain of legal paperwork. It would take years. A dead end." I felt a surge of frustration. But then I looked at Thorne's face. He was perfectly calm. This wasn't the main event. This was just the preamble. "But that's not the interesting part," he said, as if reading my mind. He reached into the folder and pulled out a separate laminated document. He slid it across the desk to me. It was a driver's license, a Georgia driver's license. The picture on it was unmistakably Chloe. A few years younger, perhaps, her hair a slightly different shade of blonde, but it was her. The eyes, the smile, it was her. But the name on the license was not Chloe Thomas. The name was Jessica Miller. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The address was for a small apartment in Savannah. The date of issue was 3 years ago. "Your daughter-in-law, Chloe Thomas," Thorne said, his voice quiet but heavy with significance, "appears to have a second completely legal identity." We did a deep dive. "This isn't a cheap fake, Mr. Thomas. This is a real state-issued ID, which means she had a birth certificate and a social security number to get it. Jessica Miller has a clean credit history, a bank account with a few $1,000s in it, and has been filing her own tax returns for the last 5 years, claiming a modest income as a freelance graphic designer." A cold dread, heavier and more profound than anything I had felt before, settled in my stomach. The story I had been telling myself of a desperate couple making a terrible, impulsive decision was a fairy tale. She has been cultivating this identity for years. Thorne continued his words like hammer blows. "The offshore accounts, the ones in Zurich and Cyprus and Singapore, they are not in the name of Chloe Thomas. They are in the name of Jessica Miller. She used this second identity to open the accounts long before your son's death. Some of them were opened over 2 years ago." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The full horrifying truth of it was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't my son's stupid plan. This was her plan. It had always been her plan. The insurance fraud wasn't a desperate act cooked up in a moment of crisis. It was the final lucrative step in a long, patient, and meticulously crafted con. My son, Andre. He hadn't been her partner in crime. He had been the final ingredient. He was the mark. The fat sacrificial lamb she needed to slaughter to activate a scheme she had been building for years. She hadn't just betrayed him. She had used him from the very beginning. The depth of her premeditation, the sheer cold-blooded evil of it was almost incomprehensible. How I whispered my voice a dry rasp. How does someone just create a whole new person? With help, Thorne said. Our friend Ricardo Diaz, the gardener. His connections in the Miami underworld specialize in exactly this kind of thing. For the right price, they can procure a new identity clean and verifiable. We believe Chloe met him years ago, not months ago. We believe he was her partner in this long before he ever set foot in your son's garden. Andre didn't hire a gardener, Mr. Thomas. He hired his wife's accomplice. I closed my eyes, the web of lies so tangled, so vast it made my head spin. I was no longer dealing with a greedy, opportunistic daughter-in-law. I was dealing with a professional criminal. A ghost. A woman who had a second name, a second life, a life that was now funded with $2 million of stolen money. I opened my eyes and looked at Thorne. My mission, which I had thought was a race against a loan shark, had just become infinitely more complex. The hunt was no longer just about justice for Andre. It was about taking down a dangerous, intelligent, and very well-prepared con artist. The thought was daunting, but it did not deter me. It only strengthened my resolve. I looked at the driver's license again, at the smiling face of Jessica Miller. A ghost. But even ghosts have weaknesses. Even the most carefully constructed plans have a flaw. Lena had taught me that. I looked up at Thorne, my mind the mind of an engineer, already shifting, adapting, looking for the new stress points in this new, more complex system. So, this Jessica Miller, I said, my voice now cold and clear. Does she have any weaknesses? I looked at the driver's license again, at the smiling face of Jessica Miller. A ghost. But even ghosts have weaknesses. Even the most carefully constructed plans have a flaw. Lena had taught me that. I looked up at Thorne, my mind, the mind of an engineer, already shifting, adapting, looking for the new stress points in this new, more complex system. So, this, Jessica Miller, I said, my voice now cold and clear. Does she have any weaknesses? Thorne leaned back in his chair, a look of professional respect in his eyes. She has one great weakness, Mr. Thomas. The same weakness all con artists have. She trusts no one, but she has to rely on at least one other person to make her plan work. In this case, that person is Ricardo Diaz, and he in turn is a man with a multitude of weaknesses, a taste for expensive things, a history of betrayal, and a network of associates who are even more dangerous than he is. He is her Achilles heel. The entire structure of her plan rests on his loyalty, and men like him have no loyalty. So we apply pressure to him, I said, the strategy beginning to form in my mind. That would be my recommendation, Thorne confirmed. We can go to the insurance company with what we have now. Their fraud unit is very good. They will work with the Mexican authorities, put an international alert on her accounts, and eventually they will catch her. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice firm. That's too direct. It's too clean. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Too clean? If they just freeze her accounts, the money gets tied up in legal battles for years. I explained, the engineering part of my brain taking over, analyzing the system for points of failure. She might even have the contingency plan to move it again if she gets spooked. If the money disappears, I lose my leverage. But more importantly, Mr. Thorne, a direct police and insurance investigation will eventually lead right back to the fraudulent death certificate. It will lead right back to my son. I cannot and will not be the one to hand him over to the authorities. Not yet. So you want to let her get away? Thorne asked, testing me. No, I said. I want her to face justice. But it will be Lena's brand of justice, not a clean, sterile legal proceeding. I want her to feel the walls closing in. I want her to feel the terror and paranoia that my son is feeling right now. I want her to be devoured by the same greed and treachery that she used to destroy my family. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. We don't want to blow up the dam, Mr. Thorne. We want to apply pressure to the cracks until the entire structure collapses on its own. Thorne listened, his expression unreadable. I'm listening. I'm proposing a three-pronged attack, I said. 3 separate points of pressure, all applied simultaneously, all aimed at her weakest point, her untrustworthy partner. Prong 1, we spook the partner. We make Ricardo Diaz very, very nervous. You said he has connections to a syndicate in Miami. You have contacts. I want you to use them. I want anonymous tips, whispers to be sent to his old associates. Let them know that their old friend Ricardo is in Mexico, sitting on $2 million of traceable fraudulent money. Let them wonder if he's planning to cut them out of a deal. Let them start making their own calls to him, asking questions. I want his own world to start watching him. Thorne nodded slowly, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. That will make him paranoid. He'll start seeing shadows everywhere. I like it. What's prong 2? Prong 2, we alert the insurance company, but we do it subtly. We don't walk in with this entire folder. We send an anonymous, untraceable email to the head of their fraud department. We give them just enough to start their own quiet investigation, a thread for them to pull on. A name, Ricardo Diaz, a location, Cancun, a suggestion that they look very closely into the timeline of Chloe Thomas's relationship with her gardener. We want their investigators on the ground in Mexico, adding another layer of surveillance. We want Chloe and Ricardo to feel like they are being watched without knowing who is watching them. That will amplify his paranoia, Thorne mused. He'll think his own people have sold him out to the insurance company. It will turn them against each other. Clever. And the third prong. The third prong, I said, my voice dropping, is the wild card, the most dangerous part. My son borrowed $50,000 from a loan shark named Petrov. Men like him do not like being lied to, and they do not like being left empty-handed. We need to let him know, through a secure cutout of course, that the money he is owed and the $2 million his debtor scammed is currently being spent on Rolex watches and presidential suites in Cancun. And we need to give him a name. Not Chloe Thomas. We give him the name of the man wearing the new watch, Ricardo Diaz. Thorne was silent for a long moment, processing the full weight of my strategy. He looked at me with a new level of respect. Mr. Thomas, he said finally, that is a very dangerous game. You would be sicking a wolf on them. A man like Petrov, his methods for debt collection are not subtle. It could get bloody. Chloe and Ricardo started this bloody game when they put a stranger in a car and set it on fire, I replied, my voice cold as ice. They left my son with a death sentence. I am simply redirecting the threat. I want to create a pressure cooker in that hotel suite in Cancun. I want Ricardo to be terrified of his old partners, the insurance investigators, and a violent loan shark. I want him to look at Chloe and see her not as his partner, but as the source of all his problems. And then I want to see what a man like that does when he is cornered. A slow reptilian smile spread across Marcus Thorne's face. He turns on his partner, he said. He tries to make his own deal. He gives her up to save himself. Exactly, I said. Thorne stood up and extended his hand. Mr. Thomas, it will be a pleasure to put this plan into motion. It is a high-risk, high-reward strategy, but it is brilliant in its psychological cruelty. I will need an additional advance to secure the necessary cutouts and to put my people on the ground in Mexico to observe. I wrote him another check without hesitation. As I signed my name, I felt a grim sense of finality. I had just unleashed 3 separate dangerous forces on my daughter-in-law. It was a morally gray, complex, and dangerous plan, but it felt right. It felt like the kind of justice Lena would have appreciated. It was a plan that relied on engineering, on understanding and applying pressure to the weakest points in a flawed system until the entire structure failed. I was no longer just a hunter. I was a demolition expert, and I was about to bring the whole building down. The plan was set. A complex, dangerous 3-pronged attack designed by an old engineer and a retired cop aimed at a beautiful, ruthless con artist laughing in the sun. As I left Marcus Thorne's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. The chaotic emotional storm that had been raging inside me since the funeral had finally passed. In its place was a cold, clear, and quiet sense of purpose. I knew the mission, I knew the risks, and I was ready. Thorne was handling the whispers to Ricardo Diaz's associates in Miami and the tip to the loan shark Petrov. My job, the first and most delicate move in our chess game, was to light a small controlled fire under the insurance company. I didn't do it from my home. Thorne had been very clear about that. No personal computers, no home Wi-Fi. So the next morning I found myself in a place I hadn't been in years, the Houston Public Library. The downtown branch was a grand, quiet building, a cathedral of books and silence. It felt anonymous, a place where a ghost could walk without being seen. I found an empty computer terminal in a quiet corner, the screen flickering with the generic library logo. I sat down the chair, cool and impersonal, and I began the first act of war. First, I created a new email address, a burner account, as they call it. I didn't use my own name or Andre's or Lena's. I chose a name that was anonymous but carried a certain weight, a certain promise of inside knowledge, Internal Audit 713. It sounded official. It sounded like it could be coming from a disgruntled employee, someone on the inside. Then I began to compose the message. This was the most critical part. Thorne and I had rehearsed it. The email had to be a masterpiece of suggestion, not accusation. It couldn't contain too much information, or it would immediately be flagged as personal, a revenge plot. It had to provide just enough verifiable, intriguing detail to force their fraud department to open a file. It had to be a hook, a single tempting piece of bait dropped into the deep, dark water of their corporate bureaucracy. The recipient was the head of the Special Investigations Unit at the insurance company, a name Thorne had provided. The subject line was simple, designed to be clicked on, regarding policy 774A32, Andre Thomas deceased. I took a deep breath, and I began to type. My fingers, usually so steady in the workshop, felt clumsy on the plastic keyboard. To whom it may concern, I wrote. I am writing to you as a concerned third party with information regarding the recent $2 million payout for the policy of Andre Thomas. While I have no doubt that your company performed its due diligence, there are certain facts surrounding the beneficiary, Chloe Thomas, that may warrant a second, more discreet look. I paused. The words were cold, clinical. It felt like I was writing about strangers. It may be of interest to your fraud department that the grieving widow, Mrs. Thomas, was not present at her husband's funeral. This is a verifiable fact. It may be of further interest that on the day of the funeral, she was, in fact, in Cancun, Mexico, staying at the Ritz-Carlton. This is also verifiable through her public social media posts. I didn't include the picture. That was too emotional. I was just giving them a trail of breadcrumbs to follow. Her companion on this trip is a man who was employed as her gardener, a man she knows as Carlos. His real name is Ricardo Diaz. Mr. Diaz has a history of minor fraud charges in the state of Florida and has known connections to organized crime elements in Miami. A background check on Mr. Diaz may prove illuminating. Now for the hook, the part that would make it impossible for them to ignore. Perhaps the most interesting detail for your investigators is one of timing. I would suggest you look very closely into the timeline of Chloe Thomas's relationship with Mr. Diaz. I would also suggest you investigate the date and method by which she opened the various offshore accounts to which the insurance payout is likely being transferred. You may find that her preparations for a new life began long before her husband's tragic and very convenient accident. I finished with a final anonymous line. I am providing this information out of a sense of civic duty. I will not be contacting you again. I read the email over and over, checking every word. It was perfect. It was a cold, professional, and deeply damning document. It didn't accuse Chloe of murder or fraud. It simply pointed a very bright, very powerful flashlight at a series of deeply suspicious facts and invited the insurance company to take a closer look. They were a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They did not like being made to look like fools. They would take the bait. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The first real move. The first domino. Once I pushed it, there was no going back. The consequences would be a tidal wave, and I had no way of knowing who it would sweep away in the end. I thought of Lena, of her fierce protective love. I thought of my son hiding in a dusty cabin, a prisoner of his own weakness. I thought of Chloe laughing in the sun, her victory so close she could taste it. I clicked send. The email vanished from the screen, sent out into the world. The first shot was fired. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only the grim, heavy certainty of a man who had just set a very large, very dangerous machine in motion. I meticulously cleared my tracks just as Thorne had instructed. I deleted the email from the sent folder. I cleared the browser's cache and history. I signed out of the burner account and then deleted the account itself. I left no trace. I was a ghost. I stood up and walked out of the quiet, sterile library back into the bright, noisy reality of a Houston afternoon. The city was bustling with life, thousands of people going about their days, completely unaware of the invisible war I had just declared. I felt a cold knot of anticipation in my stomach. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Now all I could do was wait for the sharks to begin to circle. The anonymous email to the insurance company was a single calculated shot fired in the dark. It was the first domino. Now it was time to push the second one a domino that was heavier, more dangerous, and far more unpredictable. It was time to unleash the tiger. For 2 days I did nothing. I waited. I let the first move ripple out into the world. I imagined the email landing on a desk in a corporate high-rise, a small digital anomaly that would trigger a quiet, methodical investigation. That was the clean part of the war, the part that was fought with spreadsheets and background checks. The next part was going to be dirty. Marcus Thorne had provided me with what he called a sterile communications package. It was a prepaid, untraceable burner phone in a plain cardboard box. His instructions delivered in his low, rumbling baritone were simple and chilling. "There is one number programmed into the phone," he'd said. "It belongs to a man who owes me a very old, very significant favor. He is a man who moves in circles you and I do not. You will call him at the designated time. You will deliver the message exactly as we discussed. You will not identify yourself. He will not ask. When the call is over, you will break the phone in half, remove the SIM card, and dispose of the pieces in 2 separate public trash cans. Is that understood?" I had understood. The time for the call was 3:30 p.m. on Friday. I didn't make the call from my home or from the cabin. At 2:30, I was sitting in my car in the sprawling, noisy parking lot of a truck stop off I-10. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and fried food. Big rigs idled their engines, a constant low growl. It was a place of transience, a river of strangers flowing from one coast to the other. It was the perfect anonymous place to do a terrible thing. I sat in my car for a long time, the burner phone feeling cold and heavy in my hand. My heart was pounding. This was a line I had never imagined crossing. I was an engineer, a man who built things, a man who believed in order and logic. I was about to make a phone call that would in all likelihood result in violence. I was about to point a loaded gun at my daughter-in-law and hope that the man holding it would only frighten her, not kill her. I thought of Lena. Would she approve of this? The question echoed in the quiet of my car. And the answer came back not in her voice, but in the memory of her eyes, the fierce protective fire I had seen in her final days. She had built a fortress to protect her family. Chloe had invaded that fortress, had desecrated it, and now I had to use the enemy's own weapons against her. Lena was a woman of morality, but she was not naive. She knew that to fight monsters, sometimes you have to invite another monster to the battle. My resolve hardened. I thought of Andre's terrified face in the dark of his house. I thought of Chloe laughing on a beach, her victory so complete, so contemptuous. I took a deep breath and I made the call. It rang twice, then a man answered. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "Yeah, I have a message for a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Petrov," I said, my voice steady, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. There was a pause. "I'm listening," the man said. "The message is regarding a $50,000 debt owed by a man named Andre Thomas." I continued, sticking to the script Thorne and I had rehearsed. "Tell Mr. Petrov that Andre Thomas is gone. But the money from his insurance policy, a sum of $2 million, is not." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could feel the man's attention sharpen, could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "The money is currently in Cancun, Mexico," I said. "It is being spent rather quickly by Andre's widow, a woman named Chloe Thomas, and her new partner, a man from Miami named Ricardo Diaz. Mr. Petrov might be interested to know that Mr. Diaz is currently wearing a new $20,000 Rolex, likely paid for with money that belongs to him. The happy couple is staying at the Ritz-Carlton. Presidential suite. I had delivered the payload. The location, the amount, and the insult, the image of another man spending his money. "Got it," the man on the other end rasped. "Message will be delivered." He hung up. The call had lasted less than a minute. I sat there for a moment, the dead phone still pressed to my ear. It was done. I had just unleashed a force I could not control, a violent, unpredictable variable into my own family's tragedy. There was no going back. Following Thorne's instructions, I got out of my car. I walked to the back of the truck stop near the overflowing dumpsters. With a strength I didn't know I had, I gripped the burner phone in both hands and snapped it in half. The plastic case cracked with a sickening sound. I pried the back open, removed the small SIM card, and broke that too. I threw the 2 halves of the phone into one dumpster and the shattered pieces of the SIM card into another 100 feet away. I left no trace. I got back in my car and drove away from the noise and the diesel fumes of the truck stop. The world looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but it wasn't. I felt different. I had crossed a moral boundary, and there was no uncrossing it. The first domino, the insurance company, was a gentle legal push. This one was a shove into a dark, violent alley. I had set a pack of wolves on Chloe and her lover. I did not know what they would do. I only knew that their carefree vacation in paradise was about to come to a very abrupt and very brutal end. The pressure cooker in that hotel suite was now fully primed, and all I could do was wait for the explosion. For 10 days, life for Chloe Thomas, or as she now preferred to think of herself, Jessica Miller, was perfect. Paradise was exactly as she had imagined it would be. It was the scent of salt and expensive sunscreen. It was the feel of the warm tropical sun on her skin. It was the taste of chilled champagne delivered by a smiling waiter to her private cabana overlooking an infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the turquoise Caribbean Sea. She and Ricardo were living the life she had spent years planning for, the life she had so ruthlessly earned. They occupied the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton, a sprawling space of cool marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a private balcony with a view that looked like a photoshopped travel brochure. Their days were a decadent blur of spa treatments, jet ski rentals, and shopping sprees in the high-end boutiques that lined the resort's pristine boulevards. Ricardo had his $20,000 Rolex. She had a new collection of diamond bracelets that sparkled on her wrist. The $2 million, the prize from her brilliant, perfectly executed plan, felt like an infinite resource, a magical key that could unlock any door. "To us," Ricardo said, raising his champagne flute. They were lounging by the pool, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow on their tanned skin. "To a life of no regrets. To enjoying life while you can," Chloe replied, clinking her glass against his. She smiled a genuine, relaxed, and triumphant smile. The memory of Andre, of the funeral, of the whole dreary, complicated mess felt like a lifetime ago, a bad dream from a world she no longer belonged to. She had won. It was over. She was free. The first shadow fell into her perfect paradise via email. It arrived in the inbox of the Jessica Miller account while she was scrolling through options for a private yacht charter. The subject line was innocuous policy number 774A32, follow-up documentation. The sender was the compliance department of the insurance company. She opened it, a flicker of annoyance passing through her. She assumed it was some automated tax form or a customer satisfaction survey. But the message was personal. "Dear Ms. Thomas," it began, and the use of her real name was the first small jarring note. "We hope this message finds you well during this difficult time. As part of a new standard protocol for international disbursements exceeding $1 million, our compliance department requires a brief recorded video conference with the primary beneficiary to finalize our records. This is a simple verification procedure to protect against identity fraud and ensure all international banking regulations are being met. Please let us know what time in the next 48 hours would be convenient for a brief 10-minute call. Thank you for your cooperation." Chloe read it twice. A video call, why they had already paid. The money was in her account. She had played the part of the grieving widow perfectly during her one and only phone call with them. This felt strange, unnecessary. "What is it?" Ricardo asked, looking up from his phone. "It's the insurance company," she said, trying to keep the irritation out of her voice. "Bureaucrats. They want a video call, some new routine verification for their records." Ricardo sat up, his relaxed posture suddenly gone. He put his sunglasses on, but she could still feel the intensity of his gaze. "A video call. Now why they already sent the money?" "I don't know," she said dismissively. "It's probably nothing. Some new corporate policy to cover themselves. I'll schedule it for tomorrow. Get it over with. I'll just have to put on a black blouse and pretend to be sad for 10 minutes. "I don't like it," Ricardo said, his voice low. "Deals, once they are done, should be done. People shouldn't be coming back with new procedures." His criminal instincts, honed in the back alleys of Miami, were screaming that this was not routine. This was a loose thread, and loose threads could unravel everything. "Don't be paranoid," Chloe snapped a little too sharply. "I'll handle it. I've handled everything, haven't I?" She closed the email, but the small, perfect bubble of her paradise had been pricked. A tiny sliver of unease had slipped in. The second shadow arrived a few hours later, this time for Ricardo. They were back in the suite dressing for dinner. Ricardo's phone, a brand new top-of-the-line model, began to ring. He looked at the caller ID, an unknown number with a Miami area code. His face tightened. "I have to take this," he said, walking out onto the balcony and closing the glass door behind him, a clear wall of privacy between them. Chloe watched him through the glass. He was pacing, his body tense, his movements agitated. He was no longer the relaxed, charming lover from the poolside. He was the man she had first met, a man with a watchful, dangerous energy. The conversation was short, but she could see it was not a pleasant one. When he came back inside, his face was pale, his easygoing smile completely gone. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice light casual. "No one," he said, avoiding her eyes as he fumbled with the buttons on his silk shirt. "Just an old friend. From Miami." "What did this old friend want?" she pressed. "Nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Just calling to say hello. Heard I was doing well." He was a terrible liar. Chloe knew with a sudden cold certainty that it was about the money. His old world, the world she had paid him to help her escape from, was reaching out for him. They knew. "How could they know, Ricardo?" she said, her voice dropping, losing its playful tone. "Did you tell anyone about the money?" "No," he said, spinning to face her, his eyes wide with a fear that looked a little too genuine. "Of course not. Do you think I'm stupid? I'm beginning to wonder," she said, her voice like ice. They went to dinner that night at the most expensive restaurant in the resort, a place with white tablecloths and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. But the magic was gone. The celebratory atmosphere of their vacation had evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. They barely spoke. Chloe was thinking about the insurance company, about the unexpected video call, about the cold official tone of the email. She was wondering if she had underestimated them. Ricardo was thinking about the voice on the phone, the thinly veiled threat from his old associates in Miami. He was wondering if Chloe had been careless, if she had left a trail. And for the first time, they were both looking at the person sitting across the beautiful candlelit table, the person who was supposed to be their partner in paradise. And they were wondering the same terrible thing. Are you a liability? The shadows had found them in paradise, and the walls of their luxury suite were beginning to feel less like a palace and more like a very expensive, very beautiful cage. The dinner was a disaster. They sat at a table overlooking the moonlit sea, surrounded by the quiet elegance of the resort's finest restaurant, but the paradise around them had become a prison of suspicion. The easy, flirtatious banter of the past week was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. Chloe picked at her expensive sea bass, her mind replaying the cold corporate language of the insurance company's email. Routine verification, international banking regulations. It sounded so plausible, yet every instinct in her body screamed that it was a lie. Across the table, Ricardo drank his wine too quickly, his eyes constantly scanning the other diners, his charm replaced by a nervous, watchful energy. The call from Miami had shaken him badly. They were no longer two lovers celebrating a victory. They were two co-conspirators, suddenly and acutely aware of the risks they had taken. The silence continued on the walk back to the presidential suite. When the door closed behind them, the sound echoing in the marble entryway, the fragile truce of their public appearance shattered. Chloe went directly to her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't looking at yacht charters anymore. She was researching international insurance fraud investigations, extradition treaties between the U.S. and Mexico, the capabilities of corporate forensic accountants. With every article she read, the knot of fear in her stomach tightened. She had thought the payout was the end of the game. She was beginning to realize it was only the beginning. Ricardo, meanwhile, was on the balcony chain-smoking, a dark silhouette against the glittering lights of the resort. He was staring out at the ocean, but he wasn't admiring the view. He was watching for shadows. The voice of his old associate, Marco, was a venomous whisper in his ear. "We hear you're living large, Ricky. $2 million, huh? Funny you didn't mention that deal to us." It wasn't a friendly call. It was a summons, a threat. His past, a past he thought he could outrun, had found him. After an hour of frantic research, Chloe found an article that made her blood run cold. It was on the website of a legal firm specializing in insurance law. It detailed how major insurance companies now use sophisticated AI and a team of former federal agents in their special investigations units. It talked about how they would often approve a suspicious claim, first paying out the money only to then track the funds, building an ironclad case for fraud that included international money laundering, of far more serious crime. The article said, "They don't just want to deny the claim. They want to make an example of you." Ricardo, She called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. He came in from the balcony, a cloud of cigarette smoke following him. "What?" "This video call," she said, pointing at her screen. "It isn't routine. It's a trap. They're investigating us. I'm sure of it. I told you I didn't like it," he said, his voice a low grumble. "I told you it wasn't right." "Yes, you told me." She snapped, her carefully controlled composure beginning to crack. "But what I want to know is why. Why are they investigating us? Did you get sloppy? Did you use your real name anywhere? Did you talk to anyone? Did you leave a trail?" The questions were a rapid-fire accusation, her fear twisting into blame. She was looking at him, at this man she had chosen as her partner, and for the first time she was seeing him as a liability, a loose end. Ricardo's own paranoia, fueled by the call from Miami, erupted into anger. "Me?" he scoffed, a look of disbelief on his face. "You're asking me if I got sloppy. I've been a ghost. You're the one who couldn't resist posting a picture on Instagram for the whole world to see. A picture of us in Cancun on the day of your husband's funeral. How stupid are you?" "It was a private account," she shrieked back. "Nothing is private," he yelled, his voice echoing in the massive suite. "Enjoy life while you can." Do you have any idea how arrogant that looks? How suspicious you might as well have sent a signed confession to the police and the insurance company. You were supposed to be a grieving widow laying low, and you were acting like a spring breaker who just won the lottery. "And what about you?" Chloe shot back, her voice dripping with contempt. She pointed at his wrist. "Is that Rolex part of laying low, a $20,000 beacon that screams new money?" "I told you to be discreet. I told you to be patient. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? You're just a cheap Miami thug who's never seen real money before, and you don't know how to act." The insult hit its mark. Ricardo's face hardened, his eyes turning cold. "This cheap Miami thug is the reason your plan worked. Remember, I'm the one who got the replacement. I'm the one who made the arrangements. You would be nothing without me. And you would be robbing tourists on South Beach without me," she retorted. "I'm the one who had the brains, the access, the prize. You were just the hired help." "Hired help," he said, stepping closer, his voice a dangerous whisper. "Is that what I am? Then where's my payment? You're so busy moving the money around from bank to bank, from country to country. How do I know you're not planning to cut me out, huh? How do I know that once all that money is safely hidden in your Jessica Miller accounts, you won't just make a phone call and have me disappear? How do I know I'm not just the gardener you're going to fire when you're done with him?" The moment he said the name Jessica Miller, the air went out of the room. He had never said her other name out loud before. It was a violation, a crossing of a line. It was a threat. Chloe's face went pale. "Don't you ever," she said, her voice trembling with a cold fury, "say that name out loud again." "Why?" he sneered, afraid someone might be listening. He gestured around the beautiful, luxurious suite. "You think these walls are safe? You think that phone call I got was a coincidence? My old world knows about the money, Chloe. And your old world is starting to ask questions. We're not in paradise. We're in a cage. And it's your stupid, arrogant mistakes that are rattling the bars." The illusion of their partnership was completely shattered. They stood on opposite sides of the room, looking at each other not with affection, but with a raw, naked suspicion. He saw her as a careless amateur whose arrogance was going to get them caught. She saw him as a greedy, low-level criminal whose past was drawing a world of unwanted attention to their door. They both in that moment realized with a sickening certainty that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake in trusting the other person. The first cracks in their paradise had appeared, and they were deep and irreparable. The day after their argument was a day of Cold War. They moved around the sprawling presidential suite in a tense, icy silence, two prisoners in a gilded cage. Chloe spent the morning preparing for her video call with the insurance company. She put on a somber black silk blouse. She applied makeup with a surgeon's precision, using concealer to create the illusion of dark circles under her eyes, a touch of powder to make her skin look pale and sallow. She was preparing a costume, stepping into the role of the grieving widow one more time. Ricardo watched her from the balcony, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his expression a mixture of contempt and nervous energy. He saw her for what she was, an actress, and he was beginning to wonder what her final performance would be, and if he was going to be a part of the cast or a member of the audience. At exactly 2:00 p.m., her laptop chimed. It was time. She sat at a desk with a neutral beige wall behind her, took a deep, steadying breath, arranged her face into a mask of fragile sorrow, and answered the call. Two faces appeared on the screen, a man and a woman, both in their 50s, both with the kind of bland, neutral expressions that could mean anything or nothing. They were sitting in a generic, windowless conference room. Ms. Thomas. The woman asked, her voice polite but firm. "My name is Catherine Shaw, and this is my colleague David Chen. We are with the Special Claims Unit. Thank you for making time for us." "Of course," Chloe said, her voice a soft, practiced whisper. "Anything I can do to help." "This will only take a moment," David Chen said. "This is a recorded line. Just a few routine verification questions for our records. Can you please state your full legal name for us?" "Chloe Marie Thomas," she replied. "And your late husband's full name and date of birth?" "Andre David Thomas, May 12, 1980. The questions were simple, administrative. Chloe felt herself begin to relax. This was easy. This was just the bureaucracy she had expected. She was acing the test. Then Catherine Shaw's questions shifted, her tone remaining perfectly neutral, but the subject matter turning sharp and unexpected. "Ms. Thomas, according to our records, your husband employed a landscaping service for your Houston residence. Is that correct?" Chloe felt a jolt, a flicker of alarm. "Yes," she said, her voice a little tighter than she wanted. "That's right." "And the primary gardener was a man named Carlos Shaw," continued. I believe so. Yes. He was very helpful after everything happened. We understand his legal name is Ricardo Diaz." David Chen said, his eyes fixed on her through the screen. "Can you tell us how long you had known Mr. Diaz before his employment?" The question was a direct hit. Chloe's heart began to hammer against her ribs. I didn't know him before," she lied, her mouth suddenly dry. "My husband, Andre, he was the one who hired him," I see, Shaw said, making a note. "And can you confirm your current location for us, Ms. Thomas?" "The call seems to be routing internationally." I'm staying with family," she stammered, the lie weak and transparent. "In California. I needed to get away." "So you are not, as your social media suggests, in Cancun, Mexico?" Chen asked, his voice still perfectly flat. The bottom dropped out of her stomach. They knew. They knew about the picture. They knew about Mexico. They knew about Ricardo. This wasn't a routine call. This was an interrogation. "And one final question," Ms. Thomas, Shaw said, her eyes like a hawk's. "Were you aware that your husband was in significant personal debt to the sum of over $200,000 to several private, non-traditional lenders?" Chloe just stared, speechless. The face of the grieving widow crumpled, replaced by the stark, naked panic of a cornered criminal. "Thank you for your time," Ms. Thomas, Shaw said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "That will be all. We will be in touch if any further clarification is needed." The screen went black. Chloe sat there for a long moment, her heart pounding, her mind racing. They knew. They knew everything. The walls of her perfect, stolen paradise were beginning to crumble. Ricardo came in from the balcony, his face a thundercloud. He had heard her side of the conversation. "They know about me, don't they?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You brought this on us. I told you that picture was a mistake." "Shut up, Ricardo!" she shrieked, her voice shaking. "They know about the debts. They know about everything. This is all falling apart, as if summoned by the chaos." There was a loud, firm knock at the door of their suite. It wasn't room service. It was the knock of someone who was not going to be kept waiting. Chloe and Ricardo froze, looking at each other, their argument forgotten, replaced by a shared primal fear. Ricardo crept to the door and looked through the peephole. All the color drained from his face. He stumbled back from the door as if he had been physically hit. "Who is it?" Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "It's them," he said, his voice a choked gasp. "It's Miami. It's Petrov's men." The knock came again, louder this time, a rattling, impatient sound. Ricardo, his face a mask of terror, knew he had no choice. He opened the door. Standing in the hallway were two large, intimidating men in suits that were a size too small and sunglasses that hid their eyes. They didn't look like hotel guests. They looked like thugs. They didn't try to push their way in. They just stood there, their presence a suffocating threat. The larger of the two men smiled, a humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Ricardo Diaz," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Mr. Petrov sends his regards. He was so sorry to hear about the passing of your employer, Mr. Thomas. The sarcasm was thick. He understands you've come into some money. He'd like to discuss the outstanding balance on the Andre Thomas account. The man held up a phone. On the screen was a candid photograph of Ricardo and Chloe taken just yesterday by the pool. We know you're here. We know who you're with. Mr. Petrov is a very patient man, but his patience has a limit. He would like to see his $50,000 plus a substantial late fee for his trouble by this time tomorrow. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. Otherwise, your vacation in this beautiful paradise, and your partners, will become very, very unpleasant. The man smiled again, then he and his partner turned and walked away down the hall, their footsteps silent on the thick carpet. Ricardo closed the door, his hand shaking so badly he could barely turn the lock. He and Chloe stood in the opulent suite, the scent of the ocean drifting in from the open balcony door. But it was no longer a paradise. The insurance company was investigating them from one side. Violent criminals now knew exactly where they were and were demanding money with thinly veiled threats of violence from the other. They looked at each other, their mutual suspicion now completely eclipsed by a shared, overwhelming terror. They were no longer in a gilded cage. They were in a trap, and the walls were closing in fast. The day after the threats was a day spent in a 5-star prison. The presidential suite, once a symbol of their victory, was now a claustrophobic cage, the beautiful panoramic view of the turquoise sea, a mocking reminder of a paradise that had become a battlefield. They didn't sleep. They paced. Chloe sat at her laptop, her face illuminated by the cold blue light, frantically trying to move the $2 million through a dizzying web of shell corporations and anonymous accounts. But every move she made was now tainted with fear. The insurance investigators were watching. She could feel it. Every click of the mouse felt like a step on a digital minefield. Ricardo stood on the balcony, but he wasn't admiring the view. He was watching the people by the pool, the guests coming and going from the hotel entrance. Every man in a suit, every person who lingered a moment too long was a potential threat. Was that one of Petrov's men? Was that an insurance investigator? The call from Miami had been a death sentence, and he was just waiting for the executioner to arrive. The easy charm was gone, replaced by the raw, twitchy paranoia of a cornered rat. The deadline from Petrov's men was tomorrow, noon. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that was crushing them both. Their partnership, which had been cracked by suspicion, now shattered completely under the weight of sheer terror. "We have to run," Ricardo said, storming in from the balcony, his face pale with sweat. "Now. We grab the cash you've taken out, we leave everything else, and we disappear." "Don't be an idiot," Chloe snapped, not looking up from her laptop. "Run where Ricardo. They know who we are. Petrov's people, the insurance company. They'll find us. The only way out is to move the money to make it untraceable. I need more time. Time is the one thing we don't have," he yelled, gesturing wildly at the door. "Petrov is not a man you keep waiting. He won't just send a strongly worded letter. Chloe, he will send men who will cut us into little pieces and ship us back to our families in boxes. And you think running with a bag full of cash is the answer?" She shot back, her voice dripping with contempt. "You'll be broke or dead in a week. My way, we have a chance. The money is almost clean. I just need another day to make the final transfers." He looked at her face so calm and focused on the screen, and he finally saw it. He saw the cold, hard truth. She wasn't trying to save them. She was trying to save the money. And in her world, he was completely expendable. "My cut," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Give me my cut now, and I'm gone. 500,000. You can keep the rest. Just wire it to my account, and you'll never see me again." She finally looked up from her laptop, a slow, cold smile on her face. "Your cut. You'll get your cut when the job is done, Ricky, and the job isn't done until the money is safe. We were partners, remember?" In that moment, he knew she was never going to give him the money. He had served his purpose. He was a loose end. She would use him until the last possible second, and then she would cut him loose, leaving him to face Petrov's men and the police alone. He had been played just as thoroughly as her dead husband had been. A cold reptilian survival instinct took over. He looked at her, at this beautiful, brilliant, and utterly ruthless woman, and he made his own plan. He gave a slow, defeated nod. "Okay, Chloe," he said, his voice soft. "You're right. We're in this together. I'm sorry. I'm just..." scared. She bought it. She gave him a triumphant little smile and turned back to her laptop, her focus absolute. While she was typing, Ricardo quietly picked up his phone. He walked into the massive marble bathroom and closed the door. He didn't call his friends in Miami. He didn't call Petrov. He made a different call. He called the number for the insurance company's fraud hotline, a number he had memorized from a brochure in the hotel lobby. He was going to play the only card he had left the victim. He would give them Chloe in exchange for his own freedom. As he was whispering into the phone detailing everything, another phone in the suite began to ring. The hotel phone. Chloe answered it, her voice annoyed. Yes. She listened, her face going pale. Who? Associates from where? No. We're not expecting anyone. Tell them they have the wrong room. She listened again, her eyes wide with terror. They're on their way up. She slammed the phone down just as Ricardo came out of the bathroom. It's them, she whispered, her voice a terrified gasp. Petrov's men. They're in the lobby. They're coming up. Panic exploded in the room. Ricardo rushed to the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. But just as he was about to throw it, a loud, firm knock echoed through the suite. It wasn't the heavy, brutal knock of a thug. It was a professional official knock. Ricardo looked through the peephole. He stumbled back, his face a mask of utter confusion. It wasn't Petrov's men. It was the man and the woman from the video call. The insurance investigators, Ms. Thomas, Mr. Diaz. Catherine Shaw's voice called through the door, polite but firm. David Chen and I. We have a few more follow-up questions. We're advised you're in the room. Please open the door. They were trapped. Petrov's men were coming up in the elevator. The insurance investigators were standing at the door. There was nowhere to run. Ricardo, seeing his chance, made his final desperate move. He lunged for the door and threw it open. Thank God you're here, he yelled, playing the part of the terrified victim for the two stunned investigators. This woman, she's crazy. She's been threatening me. She's involved with criminals. I'll tell you everything. Just get me out of here. But as he was delivering his panicked, treacherous performance, a new group appeared, moving swiftly down the hallway. 4 men in dark uniforms with the words Policia Federal emblazoned on their vests. They had been tipped off by the insurance company, who, thanks to Ricardo's call, now had a cooperating witness and enough cause to involve the local authorities. The lead officer pushed past everyone, his face a hard, no-nonsense mask. He held up a picture of Chloe. Chloe Thomas, also known as Jessica Miller, he said, his voice a commanding bark. Chloe just stared, speechless. You are under arrest for suspicion of international money laundering and insurance fraud, the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The scene descended into chaos. The Mexican police moved in, grabbing a screaming, protesting Chloe. Ricardo was shouting, trying to explain that he was the victim, the witness, but another officer was already cuffing him as well. The 2 insurance investigators were trying to assert their authority, flashing their credentials. And down the hall, the elevator doors opened and Petrov's 2 men stepped out, saw the uniforms and the chaos, and immediately turned melting back into the crowds of the resort. The last thing Chloe saw before they dragged her out of her paradise was the face of Ricardo. A face filled not with love, not with betrayal, but with a pathetic, desperate, and ultimately useless plea for his own survival. The trap set in motion by a quiet old man 1,000 miles away had finally and spectacularly sprung. The 10 days that followed my meeting with Marcus Thorne were the longest of my life. I drove out to the hunting cabin twice, bringing groceries and supplies for Andre. The conversations were brief and strained. He was a man coming apart at the seams, pacing the small cabin like a caged tiger, his face gaunt, his eyes filled with a desperate, hunted look. He would ask me again and again, "Did you hear anything? What's happening?" And I would give him the same empty answer. "It's in motion. Be patient." I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that I had set 3 separate dangerous forces on a collision course with his wife. The knowledge would have broken him completely. The rest of the time I was at my sanctuary, the lake house. But there was no peace. I tried to work in my workshop, the feel of the wood and the tools usually a comfort, but my hands were restless, my mind was elsewhere. I was a general who had drawn up a battle plan and sent his armies into the field. Now all I could do was wait in my tent for the reports to come back from the front. I had unleashed forces I could not control, and I spent every waking moment wrestling with the possible outcomes. What if Petrov's men got to her first? What if she managed to outsmart the investigators and disappear with the money for good? What if it all went wrong and led the police directly to Andre's hiding place? The waiting was a unique kind of torture. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my workshop, the high-pitched whine of the table saw filling the air as I made a clean cut through a plank of cedar. The ringing of my phone cut through the noise, a jarring, urgent sound. I shut off the saw, the sudden silence making my ears ring. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and looked at the screen. The caller ID read, M. Thorne. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. This was it. I walked out of the workshop and stood on the small porch, the cool morning air a sharp contrast to the warmth of the workshop. I looked out at the calm, glassy surface of the lake, took a deep breath, and answered the call. Thomas. I said, my voice steady. Mr. Thomas Thorne's low, calm baritone replied, "We have a result. The situation in Cancun unfolded yesterday evening." I didn't say anything. I just listened, my knuckles white, as I gripped the wooden railing of the porch. It played out almost exactly as we anticipated. Thorne continued his voice, a professional, dispassionate narrative of events. My team on the ground reported that the pressure was building significantly over the past 48 hours. The first prong of your plan, the anonymous email, worked perfectly. The insurance company's Special Investigations Unit, a team of ex-FBI agents, was activated. They scheduled a routine video call with Ms. Thomas, which I'm told did not go well for her. Their questions were sharp and specific. They knew about Ricardo Diaz. They knew she wasn't where she claimed to be. She was rattled. I could picture it. Chloe, the master manipulator, suddenly finding herself on the defensive, her web of lies beginning to unravel. The second prong, the whispers to Miami, also hit the mark. Thorne went on. Mr. Diaz received a very unpleasant call from his old associates. He became extremely paranoid, and he and Ms. Thomas had a significant and very loud argument. The partnership, as we predicted, was fracturing under the strain. And the third prong, I asked, my voice a low whisper. Petrov, the wild card. Thorne said, a note of professional appreciation in his voice. Mr. Petrov's representatives did not wait. 2 of his men flew to Cancun and paid a personal visit to the hotel. They did not enter the suite. They simply made their presence known and delivered a message with a 24-hour deadline. This, I believe, was the final catalyst. Chloe and Ricardo were now trapped. The insurance company was closing in on one side, and a violent criminal enterprise was closing in on the other. He paused. Cornered animals. Mr. Thomas will always try to save themselves. As we predicted, Mr. Diaz's loyalty lasted only as long as his escape routes. Yesterday afternoon, he made a frantic call to the insurance company's fraud hotline. He offered to give them, Chloe, the entire plan in exchange for immunity. He played the part of the terrified victim, the innocent gardener who was duped by a beautiful, dangerous black widow. A wave of disgust washed over me. Even in their treachery, there was a hierarchy of betrayal. The insurance team, now with a cooperating witness and enough probable cause to get the local authorities involved, made their move. Thorne said, his voice reaching the climax of the story. They, along with the Mexican federal police who were tipped off about a potential international money laundering scheme, descended on the hotel suite. According to my sources, it was quite a chaotic scene. Chloe Thomas, also known as Jessica Miller, was taken into custody. She is currently being held in a Mexican federal facility awaiting extradition. Ricardo Diaz was also detained as a material witness and a person of interest, his desperate attempt to make a deal having only partially succeeded. As for Mr. Petrov's men, they saw the police presence and vanished back into the resort crowds. The trap, Mr. Thomas, worked exactly as you designed it. I closed my eyes, the relief so profound it almost buckled my knees. It was over. The hunt was over. We had her. But the relief was quickly followed by a cold, new reality. What about my son? I asked, my mind already moving to the next most painful part of this tragedy. With Chloe in custody, she will talk. She will give them Andre to save herself. The clock is ticking before they uncover the whole truth about the faked death. I agree, Thorne said, his voice losing its narrative tone and becoming advisory. The game has changed. Your son's only chance now, his only piece of leverage, is his cooperation. He has to be the one to tell the story. You need to bring him in, Mr. Thomas. It's time. I knew he was right. I hung up the phone and stood there on the porch looking out at the peaceful lake. The morning was beautiful, the air was clean, the birds were singing. It was a perfect picture of peace. But my own personal war was not over. I had won the first most important battle. I had brought Chloe's reign of deceit to an end. But now I had to face the most difficult task of all, I had to drive back to that dusty, forgotten cabin, look my son in the eye, and tell him that the game was over. It was time to come back from the dead and face the consequences. The phone call from Thorne echoed in my mind for hours. Chloe Thomas, also known as Jessica Miller, was taken into custody. The words were a final, definitive end to a chapter of lies. The first and most important part of my mission was complete. The architect of the fraud, the woman who had laughed in the sun while my family mourned, was now in a cage. I should have felt a sense of triumph, of victory, but as I walked out of my workshop and looked at the calm, peaceful waters of the lake, I felt no joy. I only felt the heavy, cold weight of the task that was still ahead. The most painful task of all. I packed a small bag with a thermos of hot coffee, a fresh loaf of bread, and some cheese. I got in my car and began the long, silent drive back to the hunting cabin. With every mile that passed, the grim reality of what I had to do settled deeper into my bones. I was not driving to bring my son good news. I was not driving to tell him he was safe. I was driving to deliver the end of his life as he knew it. I was his father, and I was about to become his executioner. Lena had tasked me with this, with delivering the painful lesson. It was an act of terrible love, and it was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. When I arrived, the cabin was dark, even in the late afternoon light. It looked abandoned, forgotten, but I knew he was in there, a ghost in his own self-made purgatory. As I got out of the car, the cabin door creaked open, and he appeared, his figure, a gaunt silhouette against the darkness within. He rushed out to meet me, his eyes wild, his face unshaven and pale. He had lost weight. He looked like a cornered animal, starved and terrified. "Dad," he said, his voice a frantic whisper. "What is it? Did you find her? Did you hear anything? Did you get the money?" His question, still so focused on the money on the prize, sent a flicker of the old cold anger through me. Even now, after everything, he still didn't understand. The money is gone. "Andre," I said, my voice flat, leaving no room for hope. "And so is Chloe." He misunderstood, just as I knew he would, his face contorted not with grief but with the rage of a failed business partner. "She got away," he spat. "She got away with all of it." "After everything." "How she didn't get away, son," I said, and I watched the confusion dawn in his eyes. I decided to be direct, to be brutal. The time for gentle lessons was over. She was arrested. In Cancun, the Mexican federal police took her into custody yesterday evening. She's being held on charges of international money laundering and fraud. It's over. The impact of the words was visible, a physical shock that seemed to ripple through him. He stumbled back a step, his mouth falling open. "Arrested," he whispered the words, sounding foreign and impossible. How did they find her?" "It seems her new partner, Ricardo Diaz, decided to make a deal to save his own skin," I said, feeding him the version of the story he needed to hear. Her arrogance caught up to her. "When you build a life on lies and betrayal, son, it's only a matter of time before it all collapses in on itself." I watched him process this, watched his mind spin. I could see the exact moment the next more terrifying realization hit him. His eyes widened, the color draining from his face. "If she's been arrested," he started, his voice a choked gasp, "she'll talk. She'll tell them everything. To save herself. She'll tell them I'm alive." "Yes," I said. "She will." A raw primal panic took hold of him. He looked around wildly at the dense, dark woods surrounding the cabin as if the police were already closing in. "They'll be looking for me," he said, his breathing becoming fast and ragged. "What do I do? I have to run. I have to get out of the country." He started to turn, to run back into the cabin, to grab whatever meager things he had. I grabbed his arm, my grip surprisingly strong. "And go where, Andre?" I asked, my voice hard as steel. "Run with what? You're a ghost. You have no money. You have no identification. The men you owe money to are still out there, and now they'll be even angrier. There is no way. There is no place on earth for you to run." He struggled against my grip for a moment, then collapsed, all the fight going out of him. He sank to the ground, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. "Then what do I do?" he cried, his voice the broken wail of a lost child. "What do I do, Dad?" I knelt down in front of him, the damp earth cold against my old knees. This was it, the final, most painful move in the game. "You have one move left on the board, son," I said, my voice softening slightly. "One and only one. You get ahead of the story." He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and confusion. "What do you mean Maya Jones has already been in contact with the district attorney's office?" I explained. "They know about Chloe. They are building a case. Right now, to them, you are a tragic victim. But that will not last. Soon Chloe will talk and the story will change. You have a very small window of opportunity to be the one who tells the truth." "Turn myself in," he whispered, the words filled with terror. "They'll send me to prison for years." "Yes," I said, not softening the blow. "They will. But if you walk in there on your own 2 feet, if you cooperate fully, if you tell them everything, you have a chance. A chance at a reduced sentence. A chance to show them that you are not the monster Chloe will paint you as. A chance for the first time in a very long time to do the right thing." I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering. "Your mother's legacy is now a community center that will help people. Chloe's legacy will be a prison cell in a foreign country. The only question left, Andre, is, what will your legacy be? Will you be the coward who ran and hid until they hunted you down? Or will you be the man who finally stood up and faced his own mistakes?" I let the question hang in the air between us. I had laid out the options. The choice was his. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw a flicker of the sun I used to know. A flicker of shame. A flicker of honor. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on his cheek. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then he gave a slow, defeated nod. The fight was over. The day I drove my son to turn himself in was the hardest of my life, harder even than the day I thought I had buried him. We drove back to Houston in a heavy, suffocating silence. He was a ghost, a man who didn't legally exist, on his way to confess to a crime that would bring him back to life, only to lock him in a different kind of tomb. Maya Jones met us at the courthouse. She was a pillar of calm, professional strength. She took Andre into a small private room, and for the next 6 hours he told them everything, the whole ugly, sordid story. I sat on a hard bench in the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and I waited. When he finally came out, his face was pale and drawn, but for the first time in a long time, the frantic, hunted look in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, profound exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who had finally stopped running. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding descent into the machinery of the legal system. I left the peace of the lake house and rented a small, furnished apartment in Houston to be closer to the proceedings. The story as I knew it would exploded in the media. Houston tech CEO fakes death in multi-million-dollar insurance scam. The headlines were lurid, sensational. My son's face was plastered everywhere. Our family's private tragedy had become public entertainment. My days were filled with meetings in sterile, air-conditioned conference rooms with Maya and a team of prosecutors from the district attorney's office. Andre's full confession, his complete cooperation, was the foundation of their case. But they needed more. They needed to dismantle the story Chloe was already trying to sell. "She's pleading not guilty," Maya told me during one of our meetings, her face grim. "Her legal team is one of the most expensive in the state. They're going to paint her as the victim, a naive, grieving widow who was coerced and manipulated by a dangerous criminal husband. They will use Andre's debts, his connection to men like Petrov, to portray him as a monster and her as his terrified pawn. But she ran off with the gardener." I said, the absurdity of it still staggering. "A man she will claim she turned to for comfort in her grief." Maya countered, her voice sharp. "A man who her lawyers will argue was also manipulated by your son. They will try to discredit Ricardo Diaz, paint him as an unreliable witness with a criminal past, and they will try to discredit Andre, which is why they need you." And so I had to give a deposition. I had to sit in a room for 8 hours across a long, polished table from Chloe's smirking reptilian lawyer, and I had to tell them everything. I had to talk about the phone call Lena had overheard. I had to talk about the whispers at the funeral. I had to describe in humiliating detail the picture of my daughter-in-law laughing on a beach on the day I buried my son. Her lawyer was brutal. He tried to twist my words to paint me as a senile, grieving old man, to suggest my testimony was clouded by sorrow and a desire for revenge. But I held on to Lena's final lesson. I was calm. I was precise. I was an engineer presenting facts. And by the end of the day, I could see in the prosecutor's eyes that I had given them what they needed. I had become a weapon against my own son's wife. The real battle, however, was for Andre's future. The district attorney's office, armed with Andre's confession and my testimony, had a strong case. But they knew a trial would be a messy, expensive circus. Chloe's lawyers would drag our family through the mud, so they offered Andre a deal. Maya laid it out for me before we went to see him at the county jail. "It's a plea bargain," she said. "In exchange for his continued cooperation and his full public testimony against Chloe in her trial, they are willing to reduce the charges. He'll plead guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. The sentence would be 5 to 7 years in a federal facility with the possibility of parole in 3 years. It felt like an eternity and a mercy all at the same time. The visiting room at the jail was a cold, soul-crushing place. We spoke through a thick sheet of plexiglass over a crackling telephone receiver. Andre looked thinner, but the frantic terror was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber resignation. He had the look of a man who had finally hit rock bottom and was just beginning to look up. I explained the deal to him, my voice echoing unnaturally through the receiver. He listened without expression. 3 years, he said, when I was done. "Yes," I said. "And I have to testify against her, in open court." "Yes," I said again. He looked down at his hands, which were resting on the metal shelf in front of him. "She deserves it," he said softly. "She deserves all of it." "But Dad, 3 years. It's a long time." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. What should I do? This was the final test. The father in me wanted to rage against the injustice of it, to tell him we would fight to mortgage my own future, to hire an army of lawyers. But the man who had made a promise to his dying wife knew the truth. "You have to take the deal, son." I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. "This is not a punishment. This is a consequence. You made a choice, a terrible choice, and this is the price. You can't build a new life until you've paid the debts of the old one. You need to do this. For yourself. For your mother's memory. You need to do this to become a man she would be proud of again." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he nodded. "Okay, Dad," he whispered. "Okay." The sentencing was 2 months later. It wasn't a dramatic trial, just a quiet, formal proceeding in a nearly empty courtroom. I sat in the front row watching my son, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, stand before the judge. He looked small, humbled. He spoke his plea, his voice clear and steady. The judge delivered the sentence, her words acknowledging his cooperation but underscoring the severity of his crime. 5 years, with the possibility of parole in 3. The sound of the gavel was a dull final thud. I watched as 2 bailiffs stepped forward and placed their hands on my son's shoulders. He turned and looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear, regret, and for the first time a flicker of something that looked like peace. I gave him a single slow nod. The legal consequences were now real. The bill had come due, and my son finally was paying it. The sound of the gavel was the sound of a door slamming shut on a life. 5 years. I watched them lead my son away in handcuffs. His shoulders slumped, his face a mask of quiet resignation. He didn't look back again. I sat alone in the vast empty courtroom for a long time, the judge's words echoing in my head. The legal consequences were no longer an abstract concept. They were a reality, a number, a block of time that would be carved out of my son's life. I had done it. I had guided him to this place. I had convinced him to do the right thing, and the right thing had cost him his freedom. It was a victory that felt exactly like a defeat. A month passed. The media frenzy died down, replaced by the next sensational story. Our family's tragedy was old news. I spent most of that month at the lake house, finding a fragile peace in the familiar rhythms of my workshop. I drove into Houston once a week to meet with the board of the new Lena Vance Center, helping them with the plans and the renovations. The work was a comfort, a way of building my wife's legacy with my own 2 hands. But there was a hollowness to my days, a constant low-level ache. My son was in a cage. The first visit was the hardest. The prison was a grim concrete fortress on the flat, desolate plains east of the city. The process of getting inside was a series of humiliations, a slow stripping away of your dignity. You hand over your ID, you empty your pockets, you walk through a metal detector. You are buzzed through a series of heavy steel doors that clang shut behind you with a sound of absolute finality. The visiting room was a soul-crushing place designed to remind you of the barrier between the free and the unfree. A long room divided down the middle by a thick sheet of plexiglass studded with black, crackling telephone receivers. I sat on a hard plastic stool and waited. When he walked in and sat down on the other side of the glass, my breath caught in my throat. The month inside had changed him. His head was shaved. The expensive suit he had worn as a costume of success had been replaced by a faded, shapeless orange jumpsuit. He was thinner, and the last vestiges of the arrogant, confident businessman were gone, stripped away by the harsh reality of his new life. He looked humbled. He looked broken. He looked for the first time in years like my son. We picked up the receivers at the same time. For a long moment, we just looked at each other through the smudged, scratched glass, the silence stretching between us. He spoke first, his voice a rough, unfamiliar rasp. "Hey, Dad. Andre." I said, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. How are you?" he asked, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I'm all right, son. I'm spending most of my time at the lake house. The workshop it's good." He nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Mom would have liked that." "Yes," I said. "She would have." Another long silence. The air crackled with all the things we weren't saying. "Dad," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." It was the same thing he had said on the phone from his dark, empty house. But this time it was different. The panicked, self-pitying desperation was gone. In its place was a deep, sober, and profound regret. "I know you are, son," I said softly. "No," he insisted, finally looking up and meeting my eyes through the glass. "I don't think you do. I wasn't sorry before." "Not really. I was just scared. I was sorry I got caught. I was sorry Chloe betrayed me. I was sorry my plan failed. I was sorry for myself. But now, sitting in this cell with nothing to do but think for 24 hours a day, I finally understand. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry I made you bury me. I can't imagine what that must have felt like." His voice cracked, and he had to stop a wave of shame washing over his face. "And I'm sorry for what I did to Mom," he whispered, his voice full of a pain that was raw and real. "I used her memory. I let her turn our lives, our family, into a business deal. Mom knew. Didn't she, Dad? She knew what I was becoming. Before I even did. Yes, I said the truth, a hard, clean stone between us. She knew. Her whole plan," he said, shaking his head in a kind of awe. "The trust, the house, the center. It wasn't to punish me, was it? It was to teach me. It was the only way she could get me to see." "Yes," I said again. He finally understood. He finally saw the terrible, beautiful love behind his mother's intricate plan. Did she ever love me, Dad?" he asked, his voice now the small, vulnerable whisper of a child. "Chloe, was any of it real?" I looked at my son, at his face so full of pain and confusion, and I gave him the only gift I had left to give him the truth. "I don't know, son. I truly don't. Maybe in the beginning. But people like Chloe, they love the idea of things more than the things themselves, and in the end, the idea of $2 million was more powerful than the idea of you. I'm sorry." He nodded, absorbing the painful truth. We sat in silence for another minute, the only sound the crackle of the phone line and the distant echoing clang of a steel door. The guard behind him tapped on the glass. Time was up. We both stood up. Andre placed his hand on the plexiglass. I mirrored the gesture, my own hand covering his on my side of the glass. We were inches apart, but separated by a universe of his mistakes. "This isn't the end of your story, Andre," I said, my voice firm, trying to impart a lifetime of fatherly love through the cold, dead glass. "This is just a chapter, a hard chapter, but you get to decide what the rest of the book is about. You use this time. You think. You learn. You become the man your mother always knew you could be." Tears were streaming down his face now, but he nodded, his jaw set with a flicker of a resolve I hadn't seen before. "I will, Dad," he whispered. "I promise." I watched him turn and walk away, an orange figure disappearing down a long gray hallway. I stood there until he was out of sight. Then I put the phone back on its cradle and walked out, back through the series of clanging steel doors, back into the free world. I was leaving my son in a cage. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt a fragile, tender hope that his soul finally had a chance to be free. The months that followed were a slow, grinding journey through the gears of the justice system. The world I had known, a quiet world of wood grain and workshop dust, was replaced by a world of sterile conference rooms, legal depositions, and the endless droning language of the law. I became a fixture in Maya Jones's office. A quiet old man in a suit that felt like a costume, a key witness in the strange and sordid case of my own son's fraudulent death. Andre kept his end of the bargain. He told the prosecutors everything, holding nothing back. His confession was a detailed multi-hour videotaped statement that became the bedrock of the state's case against Chloe. The district attorney, a sharp, ambitious woman, saw Chloe for exactly what she was, a master manipulator, and she was determined to make an example of her. The trial of Chloe Thomas began in the spring. It was a media circus. She arrived at the courthouse every day looking like a tragic starlet from an old black and white movie, dressed in elegant, somber black, a single tear often glistening on her cheek for the cameras. Her expensive lawyers painted a masterful picture of a terrified, naive wife coerced into a monstrous plot by a desperate, dangerous, and abusive husband. They used Andre's debts, his connection to men like Petrov, to portray him as a villain who had manipulated her at every turn. For a while, watching the trial on the news, I was afraid it might even work. Then it was Andre's turn to testify. I sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. I hadn't seen my son in person since that day in the county jail. When they brought him in, he wasn't wearing a prison jumpsuit. He was in a simple dark suit that Maya had arranged for. He looked thin, humbled, but his eyes, when they met mine for a brief moment, were clear. The frantic, hunted look was gone. He took the stand, swore the oath, and for the next 6 hours, he told the truth. He spoke in a quiet, steady voice, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He told them about his business failing, about the crushing weight of his debts. He told them about his own weakness, his own greed, his own moral cowardice. He didn't make a single excuse. He owned his failure completely. Then the prosecutor asked him about the plan. "Mr. Thomas," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "whose idea was it to fake your own death?" Andre looked across the courtroom directly at Chloe. Her face was a perfect mask of innocent confusion. "It was my wife's," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "It was Chloe's idea." He went on to detail everything. The way she had presented the insurance policy as their only way out. The way she had found the contacts to procure the body and falsify the dental records. The way she had coached him on how to play his part. He told them about the secret emails, the plan to meet in South America, and the final devastating betrayal. Chloe's lawyer was brutal on the cross-examination. He tore into Andre, painting him as a liar, a failure, a desperate criminal trying to save his own skin by blaming his innocent wife. He brought up the debts, the loan sharks, the lies Andre had told me. But my son remained steady. He didn't get angry. He didn't get defensive. He just answered every question with the same simple, devastating truth. "Yes, I was in debt," he would say. "Yes, I was weak. Yes, I was a fool. And yes, she was the one who planned it all." I watched the jury. I watched their faces as they listened to my son's quiet, self-immolating confession, and then looked at Chloe, at her perfect theatrical performance of a victim. And I knew. The truth in the end has a weight that lies do not. A week later, the jury came back. The verdict was guilty. Guilty on all counts. I watched as Chloe's perfect mask finally shattered her face, contorting into an ugly, snarling expression of pure, unadulterated rage as the guards led her away. Justice for her had been served. 2 weeks after that, it was Andre's turn. The courtroom was nearly empty this time. No reporters, no curious spectators, just me, Maya, and a few court officials. Andre was brought in back in his orange jumpsuit. He stood before the judge, his shoulders straight. The judge looked down at him from her high bench. Her expression was stern. "Andre Thomas," she began, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "You have pled guilty to a deplorable and greedy crime. You caused immeasurable pain to your family and made a mockery of the systems designed to protect them. Your actions were a profound betrayal of trust." I held my breath. However, the judge continued, "This court also recognizes your complete and total cooperation with the state. Your testimony was not only truthful, but it was essential in bringing a more manipulative and dangerous criminal to justice. You have not shied away from your own culpability. You have shown what this court believes to be genuine remorse." She looked at him for a long moment. Taking all factors into consideration, this court sentences you to a term of 5 years in a minimum security federal facility. You will be eligible for parole in 3. The sound of the gavel was a dull, final thud. 5 years. The price to be paid. I watched as the bailiffs stepped forward and placed their hands on my son's shoulders. He turned and looked at me one last time across the empty courtroom. His eyes were filled with a mixture of fear, regret, and for the first time, a flicker of something that looked like peace. I gave him a single, slow nod. He had faced the music. He had paid the bill. They led him away. I sat alone in the courtroom until the last of the officials had filed out, leaving me in the silence. My long, terrible journey was over. I had upheld my promise to Lena. I had guided my son to do the right thing. But the cost, the terrible cost, was the sight of my only child being led away to a cage. There was no victory here. There was only the quiet, somber, and necessary weight of consequences. 3 years. 3 years have passed since the day I sat in that silent courtroom and watched my son be led away. 3 years of quiet days and long, quiet nights. It's a strange thing, time. When you're in the middle of a storm, it feels like it will never end. And when it's over, the quiet that follows feels just as infinite. I have lived those 3 years here in the sanctuary Lena built for me. The cabin on Lake Lanier is no longer a refuge. It is simply my home. I have learned its rhythms, the way the morning sun hits the porch, the way the lake changes color from a slate gray in the winter to a brilliant, sparkling blue in the summer. My life is simple. I wake with the sun. I drink my coffee on the porch, listening to the water lap against the shore. And then I go to my workshop. The workshop has become the center of my world. In it, I have found a solace that I thought I had lost forever. I have built bookshelves that now line the walls of the cabin filled with my books and Lena's. I have built a sturdy dining table from a single magnificent slab of oak. I have built rocking chairs and small intricate puzzle boxes, and even a small wooden boat that I now take out on the lake in the evenings. My hands, which had trembled with rage and sorrow, are steady again. They are the hands of a carpenter, a builder. In the act of creation, I have slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt myself. Once a month, I make the long drive back to Houston. Not to the empty apartment I once rented, but to a part of the city I never used to visit. I go to the Lena Vance Center for Youth Arts and Trades. I park across the street, and for an hour, I just watch. The house, our old home, is alive in a way it never was even with us. It's loud. I can hear the chaotic, beautiful sound of a teenage rock band practicing in what used to be Andre's bedroom. I can see a group of young women, heads bent in concentration, learning how to wire a circuit board in the old sunroom. And from the workshop in the back, my old workshop, I can hear the familiar, comforting sounds of saws and hammers, a new generation learning the trade that gave me my life. Lena's legacy is a living, breathing thing. It is a symphony of youthful energy and newfound purpose. Sometimes the director of the center, a wonderful, energetic woman, will see me and wave me over. I'll go in, and a kid with paint on his jeans will proudly show me the mural he's working on, or a young man with sawdust in his hair will ask my advice on a difficult joint. In those moments, my heart is so full of a bittersweet pride, a love for my wife so profound it almost hurts. This is what she protected. This is what she built. As for the other architect of our family's tragedy, I hear very little. Marcus Thorne sends me an update once a year. Chloe is serving a 20-year sentence in a federal prison for fraud and money laundering. Her appeals have all been exhausted. She tried to sell out Ricardo Diaz for a lighter sentence, but his testimony combined with the evidence we provided was enough to convict them both. I do not feel triumph when I hear this. I feel nothing at all. She is a ghost from a past that no longer has the power to haunt me. And Andre, I kept my promise. Every week for 3 years, I have written him a letter. I don't write about the case, or about Chloe, or about the pain. I write about simple things. I tell him about the family of deer that comes to the edge of the woods in the morning. I tell him about the bookshelf I'm building, about the tricky mortise and tenon joints. I tell him stories about his mother that he has never heard before. Small, simple memories. The letters are a thin thread, a fragile connection to a world he is no longer a part of. His replies were sparse at first, just a few lines on a piece of prison-issue paper, the words stiff and full of a shame so deep it was hard to read. But over time they have become longer. He writes about the classes he's taking to get his GED. He writes about his job in the prison library. He writes about the books he's reading. He never asks for anything. He never complains. He is slowly, painfully rebuilding himself from the inside out. Every month I make another drive, this one to a much grimmer place. I visit him. We sit across from each other, a thick sheet of plexiglass between us, and we talk through a crackling phone receiver. The conversations are often awkward, filled with long silences. But we are talking. We are building a new relationship, one that is not based on the lies of the past, but on the hard, unvarnished truth of the present. This morning I received a letter, not my weekly letter from Andre, but a formal one with an official seal. It was from the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. His hearing was last month. The letter was brief and to the point. His request for parole based on his good behavior and his cooperation with the state had been granted. He is being released in 2 weeks. I sat on the porch, the letter in my hand, and looked out at the water. The long wait is almost over. For 3 years my son has been a ghost, a name on a piece of paper, a voice on a crackling phone. And in 2 weeks he will be a man again, walking out into the sunlight. I feel a surge of hope, a powerful fatherly love that has never truly gone away. But underneath it there is a tremor of apprehension. The man who is getting out of prison is not the son I knew. The arrogant, ambitious boy is gone. But who has taken his place? Can a relationship so thoroughly broken ever truly be mended? The war is over. The sentence has been served. And now the most difficult part of all is about to begin, the quiet, uncertain work of rebuilding. 3 years. 3 years have passed since the day the gavel fell, a dull thud that had echoed in my heart ever since. 3 years of quiet days and long, quiet nights. 3 years of letters, their pages filled with the slow, painful process of a man rebuilding his own soul from the inside of a cage. 3 years of monthly visits, of conversations through a thick sheet of plexiglass, of trying to rebuild a bridge across a chasm of betrayal and pain. And now the wait was over. The drive to the federal facility in Beaumont was a long one, a 2-hour journey through the flat green expanse of East Texas. I drove in the pre-dawn darkness, the highway a lonely ribbon of asphalt under my headlights. My heart was a strange mix of hope and a deep, profound apprehension. I was going to pick up my son. But who was the man I was going to meet? Was he the arrogant, foolish boy who had followed his wife down a path of ruin? Was he the broken, weeping man I had last spoken to in the county jail? Or was he someone new, someone forged in the quiet, brutal fire of a prison cell? The letters I had received over the past 3 years were from a man I didn't know, a man who wrote of remorse, of study, of a quiet determination. But words on paper are one thing. A man is another. I arrived at the facility an hour early. It was a low, sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire, a grim, soulless place that seemed to suck the very color out of the morning sky. I didn't go inside. I parked my car in the designated visitor's lot facing the main gate, and I waited. The memories came unbidden. I remembered the day I brought him home from the hospital, a tiny, perfect bundle wrapped in a blue blanket, his whole life a universe of pure potential in my arms. I remembered the day I dropped him off at college, watching him walk away so full of confidence and swagger, ready to conquer the world. I had been there for all the beginnings of his life, and now I was here at a different kind of beginning, waiting outside a prison to pick up my 48-year-old son, a convicted felon. The bitter irony of it all was a heavy weight in my chest. At exactly 8:00 a.m., a heavy electronic buzzer sounded and a small steel door next to the main gate opened. A figure emerged, silhouetted for a moment against the darkness within. He stepped out into the bright morning sun and blinked as if the light was a physical shock. It was Andre. But it was not the Andre I remembered. The expensive suit, the confident posture, the arrogant swagger, it was all gone. He was wearing simple, state-issued clothes, a plain gray sweatshirt and ill-fitting jeans. He was thin, almost gaunt, his face leaner, the lines around his eyes deeper. His head was shaved and his skin was pale from 3 years spent away from the sun. He was holding a single small cardboard box containing, I assumed, the entirety of his worldly possessions. He looked not like a fallen executive, but like a refugee, a man stepping into a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on his back. He saw my car across the parking lot. He stopped, his shoulders tensing for a moment. and we just looked at each other across the 100 yards of empty asphalt, the full, crushing weight of the last 3 years hanging in the air between us. He began to walk. It was a slow, hesitant walk, the walk of a man who was no longer sure of his place in the world. As he got closer, I could see the details of his face. The shame was still there in the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. But the frantic, hunted terror was gone. In its place was a quiet, deep-seated sobriety, a stillness I had never seen in him before. I got out of the car as he reached it. The moment was thick with an awkward, painful silence. "What do you say? What do you do? Do you hug the son you helped put in prison? Do you shake his hand?" There was no rule book for this. He stopped in front of me, clutching the cardboard box to his chest like a shield. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice a low, rough rasp. "Andre." I replied, my own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then he did something that broke my heart. He started to extend his hand for a formal handshake as if we were strangers. But he stopped halfway, his hand hovering in the empty space between us. I couldn't bear it. I closed the distance and wrapped my arms around my son. He was stiff at first, a stranger in my embrace. But then I felt his shoulders begin to shake and he collapsed against me, his body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. I just held him, my own eyes burning with tears, my hand on the back of his shaved head, just as I had when he was a little boy. We stood there for a long time in the middle of a prison parking lot, two broken men trying to piece together the ruins of a family. Finally, he pulled away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, his face filled with a raw, profound shame. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I know," I said. "Let's go home." The first hour of the drive was silent. Andre just stared out the window, his eyes wide as if he were seeing the world for the first time. The speed of the cars on the highway, the vibrant green of the trees, the vast open sky. It was all a sensory assault on a man who had lived in a world of gray concrete and muted sounds. I didn't push him to talk. I just drove. Finally, as we were nearing the turnoff for the lake house, I broke the silence. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "We can stop for some breakfast." He turned to me, a small, sad smile on his face. "You know what I dreamed about in there, Dad," he said, his voice quiet. "More than anything, a simple bowl of oatmeal, with brown sugar and raisins, like the kind Mom used to make. It wasn't a request for a fancy steak dinner or a return to the life of expensive tastes that had destroyed him. It was a request for a memory, a request for home." I looked at the stranger sitting next to me, this quiet, humbled man who wore my son's face. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was long. The work of rebuilding would be hard. But for the first time, we were in the same car on the same road, heading in the same direction. The first tentative stone of a new foundation was about to be laid. The first few weeks after Andre came home were the most difficult of my life. He was a ghost in my quiet sanctuary. He lived in the small guest room of the cabin, and he moved through the house with a quiet, apologetic deference that was heartbreaking to watch. He was a stranger who was afraid to take up too much space, a man who seemed to be constantly bracing for a blow that was no longer coming. We existed in a state of profound and awkward silence. We would eat our meals together at the large oak table I had built, the only sounds the clinking of our forks against the ceramic plates. The silence was a living thing, a heavy, suffocating presence filled with all the things we couldn't say. The betrayal, the lies, the funeral, the prison, the years of pain and disappointment. I would try to bridge the gap. "The lake was calm this morning," I'd say. "Yeah," he'd reply, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Think I'll do some work in the shop after dinner." I'd try again. "Okay," he'd say, and the silence would rush back in a tide of unspoken history. I would look across the table at this stranger who wore my son's face, and a feeling of despair would wash over me. Was this it? Was this all that was left of our family? A shared silent meal between two men who no longer knew how to speak to each other. I had fought so hard, had executed Lena's brutal, beautiful plan, had waited 3 long years for this moment. And now that it was here, I had no idea what to do. I had a blueprint for justice, but I had no blueprint for this. The breakthrough, when it came, did not come with words. It came with the familiar scent of sawdust. It was a Saturday afternoon, about a month after he had come home. I was in my workshop, the one place where I still felt whole, the place where the world made sense. I was working on a new rocking chair for the porch, my handplane gliding smoothly over a long plank of cedar, the wood peeling away in fragrant, perfect curls. I was lost in the work and the familiar rhythm of the blade and the grain. I sensed him before I saw him, a shadow in the doorway. I looked up. Andre was standing there just outside the workshop watching me. He had been doing this for weeks, lingering by the door like a child afraid to enter his father's sacred space. He would watch for a few minutes, his expression a mixture of longing and shame, and then he would disappear. This time I didn't let him. I finished my pass with the plane, checked the smoothness of the wood with my fingertips, and then I looked at him. I didn't smile. I didn't invite him in. I just looked at him for a long moment. I could use a hand. I said, my voice matter of fact. My back isn't what it used to be. I need someone to hold the other end of this while I mark the cut. He hesitated, his eyes filled with a deep uncertainty. He looked as if I had just asked him to perform open-heart surgery. It's just a piece of wood, son, I said, my voice a little softer this time. It's not too heavy. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped into the workshop. It was the first time he had set foot in it since he had arrived. He walked over to the workbench, his movements cautious as if he were in a museum. He looked at the tools on the wall, at the neat stacks of lumber, at the fine layer of sawdust that covered everything. He took a deep breath, and I saw his shoulders relax just a little. He was a carpenter's son. This was a language he understood even if he had forgotten how to speak it. He came and stood at the other end of the cedar plank. Just hold it steady against the fence, I said, demonstrating. He did as I asked, his hands, which had once been so soft, now rough and calloused from his work in the prison laundry, gripping the wood. We worked in silence for the next hour. I would measure and mark, and he would hold. I would make a cut, and he would help me guide the wood. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the future. We talked about the wood. The grain on this piece is beautiful, he said at one point, his voice quiet, almost reverent as he ran his fingers over the smooth, reddish surface. It's good solid cedar, I replied. Honest wood. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. The words hung in the air for a moment. He didn't look at me, but I saw him nod. As we worked, a strange thing happened. The shared simple task began to do what all our stilted conversations could not. It began to break down the walls between us. With his hands busy, with his eyes focused on the task, he finally began to talk. I don't know what to do, Dad, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur almost to himself. I don't even know how to be a person anymore. In there every day is just survival. You do what you're told. You eat what you're given. You don't think about tomorrow. You just get through the day. But out here, all this quiet, all this space, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I feel useless. I stopped my work and looked at him. It was the most honest thing he had said to me since he had come home. I picked up a rough-cut piece of wood from the scrap pile. It was jagged, uneven, full of knots and imperfections. I handed it to him. You want to know what to do, I said. You do what a carpenter does. You start with the raw material. You look at it. You see its flaws. You see its potential. You don't try to fix it all at once. That's how you make mistakes. You make one cut at a time. You find the true grain, the strong parts, and you follow it. You sand away the rough spots. You take your time. You don't force it. You build it piece by piece into something new, something that is strong and honest and useful. He looked at the piece of wood in his hands, and then he looked at me. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't shame or fear or regret. It was understanding. We didn't say much more after that. But the silence that filled the workshop for the rest of the afternoon was different. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the dinner table. It was a comfortable working silence. The silence of two men, a father and a son, working side by side. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shafts of light through the workshop window, we stood back and looked at the first two legs of the rocking chair, perfectly joined and sanded smooth. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the first brick. And I knew with a quiet, hopeful certainty that this was how we would heal. Not with grand apologies or dramatic confessions, but here in the quiet of the workshop with the scent of cedar in the air, we would rebuild our family one piece of honest wood at a time. The months that followed the day I picked Andre up from prison were a study in quiet patience. We fell into a new rhythm, a life dictated by the rising sun and the simple, honest work of our hands. We spent our days in the workshop, the one place where the ghosts of the past seemed to hold no power. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was no grand, tearful reconciliation, no dramatic moment of absolution. Instead, we communicated through the work. I would show him how to read the grain of a piece of cherry wood, and he would listen, his attention absolute. He would learn to cut a dovetail joint, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I would watch as his hands, once so adept at signing contracts and tapping on keyboards, rediscovered a different kind of intelligence, a tangible creative skill. We were rebuilding our relationship the only way I knew how. We were building something together. We started with a simple bookshelf, then a small coffee table. And now we were in the middle of our most ambitious project, yet a small, sturdy wooden canoe built from long, flexible strips of cedar. It's evening now. The canoe rests on sawhorses in the workshop, its beautiful curved frame almost complete. Andre is inside the main cabin reading a book by the fire. And I am sitting here on the porch in one of the rocking chairs. I built a cup of hot tea warming my hands. The air is cool and crisp, and the setting sun has painted the surface of the lake in fiery strokes of orange, pink, and deep, majestic purple. For the first time in what feels like a lifetime, my mind is quiet. The storm has passed. For so long, my inner world was a place of turmoil. First, there was the raw, bottomless grief of losing Lena, a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical part of me had been amputated. Then came the second grief, the more complex and sickening grief of losing my son, of watching him be buried, of believing he was gone forever. That grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then came the rage, the cold, clean, energizing fury I felt when I saw Chloe's picture. That rage was a tool. It was a weapon. It gave me a focus, a mission. It burned away the paralysis of my sorrow and allowed me to act, to plan, to become the hunter. It served its purpose, but it was a heavy burden to carry. It was a fire that, if I had held on to it for too long, would have consumed me completely. After the rage came the long, anxious wait. 3 years of waiting for my son to pay his debt of writing letters into a void, of visiting a ghost behind plexiglass. That period was defined by a tense, gnawing apprehension. Who would he be when he came out? Could we ever find our way back to each other? But now all of that is gone. The grief, the rage, the anxiety, they have all receded like a great tide going out, leaving behind a shore that is calm and still and clean. And in their place is this quiet, this peace. It's not a giddy happiness. It's not the joyful, boisterous sound of our family when Lena was alive and Andre was a boy. I know that kind of happiness is a thing of the past, and I have made my peace with that. This is something different. It is a peace born of acceptance. I have accepted the losses. I have accepted my son's flaws and my own. I have accepted the difficult, painful choices I had to make. I no longer question them. They are simply part of the story, part of the grain of my life. It is a peace born of purpose. In the workshop, my hands know what to do. The wood does not lie. A joint is either true or it is not. A line is either straight or it is crooked. There is an honesty in the work that has become my anchor. It is a tangible, real-world antidote to the years of illusion and deception. I am a builder, and I am finally building again. I used to wonder if I could ever truly forgive my son. I've come to realize that's the wrong question. Forgiveness is a simple word for a complex thing. The scars of his betrayal will always be there. They are a part of our history now, but I have moved beyond the need for anger or retribution. I have made a choice to love the quiet, humbled man he is, now, not to mourn the arrogant boy he once was. Our relationship is not what it was, but it is real. It is honest, and in its own quiet, broken way, it is strong. The screen door of the cabin creaks open and Andre steps out onto the porch. He holds 2 mugs of tea and hands one to me without a word. He sits in the other rocking chair, the one he helped me finish. We sit in a comfortable silence for a long time, watching the last sliver of the sun disappear behind the distant hills. "It's a beautiful sunset, Dad," he says, his voice quiet. "Yes, it is, son," I reply. And that's all we need to say. The simple shared moment, free of tension, free of subtext, is a testament to how far we have come. I look out at the darkening water and I feel Lena's presence beside me, as real as the warm mug in my hands. I finally understand the full depth of her plan. This was her endgame, not the downfall of Chloe, not the punishment of Andre, not even the creation of her legacy at the center. This This quiet moment, a father and a son sitting together in a place of peace, the wounds still there, but beginning finally to heal. This was the victory she had planned for me all along. This was her true gift. This is peace, and I am so, so grateful for it. It has been 4 years now since the day my son came home. 4 years of quiet seasons passing over the lake house. 4 years of rebuilding not just the canoe that now rests by the dock, but the fragile, splintered thing that was our family. The work has been slow, painstaking, and often silent. There are some wounds that words cannot heal, some chasms of betrayal so deep that you can only build a bridge across them with the slow, steady work of shared time and quiet, consistent action. We have found a new rhythm, he and I. He has a job in the small town nearby working for a construction crew. He, the man of big tech dreams and bigger debts, now works with his hands. He leaves before dawn and comes home at dusk, tired, his hands calloused, his clothes covered in the honest dirt of a day's labor. He is quiet, but it is not the haunted, ashamed quiet of his first few months. It is the quiet of a man who is at peace with himself, a man who has paid his debts, and is now for the first time building a life that is truly his own. Today we drove back to Houston. We are standing across the street from the house on Magnolia Drive, the house where I lived with Lena for 50 years, the house I once called home. But it is not a house anymore. Today is the grand opening of the Lena Vance Center for Youth Arts and Trades. The lawn is filled with people. The mayor is here. There are reporters and community leaders and dozens of families from the neighborhood. There are teenagers, kids from all walks of life, their faces bright with excitement. A banner hangs over the porch I built, its bold letters proclaiming the name of my wife to the world. I watch as a young woman, the center's first scholarship recipient, speaks at a podium, her voice ringing with a hope and a promise for the future. Andre stands beside me, his hands in his pockets. He is wearing a simple suit, a stark contrast to the flashy, expensive ones he used to favor. He is just watching, his expression unreadable. As I stand here listening to the speeches and the applause, the entire epic, heartbreaking story of the past few years plays out in my mind. And I am struck by a final, simple thought. This whole story, from the faked death to the prison cell, from the empty grave to this bustling community center, has been about one thing: the search for a legacy. Jamal and Chloe, they thought a legacy was a thing you could inherit, a prize you could claim. They saw it as a number in a bank account, a deed to a house. They were so desperate to claim this prize that they were willing to build a world of lies to get to it. Chloe built a second identity, a secret life. Andre built a lie so profound he had to fake his own death to sustain it. They surrounded themselves with deception, and in the end, that is all they were left with. Their lies became a cage, a prison of their own making, long before any real prison was involved. Their legacy is one of ruin and shame, a cautionary tale whispered among the family. Then there was my role. I too had to build a lie. I had to become the frail, confused old man, a deception that felt like a betrayal of my own character. But my lie was different. It wasn't a cage, it was a key. It was a tool I used not to take something, but to uncover something, the truth. My journey through this whole affair was a painful, methodical stripping away of lies, layer by layer, until only the hard, unvarnished truth remained. And I have learned that the truth, when it finally comes, is a powerful and terrifying thing. It is a fire that can burn a family to the ground. It burned away the son I thought I had, revealing the stranger he had become. It burned away the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home, revealing the predator she had been all along. It burned away my own comfortable illusions. The fire of the truth is not something to be trifled with. It leaves scars. But as I stand here watching these children, listening to the sound of laughter and hope coming from the rooms of my old house, I understand the other side of it. The truth is also a cleansing fire. It burns away the rot, the weakness, the disease. Andre's journey has been a trial by fire. He had to have his world of lies turned to ash before he could find the solid ground of an honest life. His confession on the witness stand, the most humiliating moment of his life, was also his first truly honest act in years. It was the beginning of his salvation. And this center, this is the final beautiful legacy of the truth. It stands here today because Lena was brave enough to see the truth of what our son was becoming. It stands here because I was willing to fight a war of deception to bring that truth to light. It is a legacy built not on a fraudulent insurance claim, but on an honest foundation. It is a place that will teach children the value of an honest skill, the dignity of working with your hands, the truth of a job well done. It is the ultimate testament to the woman I loved, a woman who valued truth and character above all else. The ceremony is ending. The mayor cuts a ribbon and the crowd applauds. Andre turns to me, his eyes shining with an emotion I haven't seen in years. Mom would have loved this, he says, his voice thick. She would have been so proud. Yes, son, I say, placing my hand on his shoulder. She would have. We stand there for a moment, father and son, two survivors of a long and terrible war, looking at the house that is no longer our home. It is something more now. It is a symbol of our family's painful, brutal, and ultimately hopeful journey from a legacy of lies to a legacy of truth. The healing is not complete, but it is real, and it is built on a foundation that is at last solid and true. We stood there for a long time, father and son, two survivors of a long and terrible war, looking at the house that was no longer our home. It was something more now. It was a symbol of our family's painful, brutal, and ultimately hopeful journey from a legacy of lies to a legacy of truth. The healing is not complete, but it is real. And it is built on a foundation that is at last solid and true. So that's where our story ends and where it begins again. My son and I standing on the foundation of a new beginning, a foundation built from the ashes of a terrible fire. And as I stand here, my story complete, I've had a lot of time to think about the lessons learned about the true meaning of loss and about the difference between justice and revenge. When this whole nightmare began, I thought I was mourning one single catastrophic loss, the death of my only son. I thought the pain of it was the worst thing a man could ever feel. But I was wrong. What followed was a series of losses, each one more profound and more painful than the last. I lost the man I thought my son was discovering, a stranger corrupted by weakness and greed. I lost the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my family, discovering a predator hiding behind a beautiful smile. I lost my sense of safety, my belief in the simple goodness of the world. And in a way, I lost myself, becoming a hunter, a schemer, a man who had to walk through the dark and dirty alleys of the world to find his way. In the beginning, what drove me was rage, a simple, clean, and righteous anger. I wanted revenge. I wanted to see Chloe punished. I wanted to see her suffer as I had suffered. And a part of me, a part I am not proud of, took a grim satisfaction in setting the forces in motion that would lead to her downfall. I unleashed the tigers, and I watched as they closed in on her. But as the plan unfolded, I began to realize that what I was seeking was not revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything, including the person who lights it. It's a hot, chaotic, and ultimately empty emotion. What Lena had wanted and what I came to understand was something colder, cleaner, and far more difficult. It was justice. Justice isn't about causing pain. It's about restoring balance. It's about forcing a person to stand in the wreckage of their own choices and take account of the damage they have caused. Revenge is an act of passion. Justice is an act of engineering. It's about understanding a flawed system and applying pressure to the weak points until it collapses, revealing the truth that was buried underneath. The greatest lesson, however, was the one I learned about being a father. For years, I thought my job was to provide, to protect, to build a safe and comfortable world for my son. I thought that was what love was. But in doing so, I had shielded him from consequences. I had made his life too easy. I had, with the best of intentions, helped to build the crooked house of his character. Lena knew that the greatest act of love she could offer him in the end was to tear that house down, to let him feel the cold, hard ground of rock bottom. Her justice was a form of terrible love, a love so fierce it was willing to break her own son's heart in the desperate hope that it would give him a chance to grow a new, stronger one in its place. If there's one single truth that has come out of this whole fire, one thing I would pass on from my 75 years, it is this. I thought my greatest loss was my son's death, but I was wrong. The true loss was the man he had become long before the fake funeral. His mother and I gave him every advantage, but we failed to teach him the one thing that matters: character. I learned that a father's love isn't always about protection. Sometimes it's about letting your child face the consequences you tried so hard to shield them from. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about clearing the rubble so something true has a chance to be rebuilt from the foundation up. The road ahead for Andre will be long. The road ahead for our relationship will be long. But for the first time, it is an honest road. We are no longer living in a world of comfortable lies. We are living in a world of difficult, painful, but beautiful truth. And that I have come to believe is the only legacy that truly matters. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between a simple revenge and a more complicated justice? I'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my family's story. It has been a difficult one to tell, but a necessary one. If my story has resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the hard lessons and the quiet victories of life. Be well and be kind to one another.